Sacred Symbols is sponsored by Tommy John and their amazing no wedgie guarantee. Join me in comfort, won't you? Shop Tommy John's Cyber Monday sale now. Get 33% off everything plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/sacred. That's TommyJohn.com/SACRED. It's one of Tommy John's biggest sales of the year. 33% off everything plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/sacred. See site for details. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast. This is episode number 230. 230. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today I'm joined by only one of my sons, executive producer of Last Stand Media, Dustin Furman. Dustin, how are you today, my friend?
Motherfucker Moriarty. How are you? Has anyone ever said that to you before?
I don't think so. No.
Well, I wanted to be the first. I wanted to start with a little bit of aggression. I got to fill the void for our good friend Christopher, who, again, may or may not be dead. No. He's very much alive. But
for now,
I'm doing pretty good. We've got a full house. You know, it's the day before Thanksgiving. We're recording slightly early, and let me tell you, Colin, I'm not pleased. My turkey is very frozen still, and this isn't my fault. Yeah. Because it has been in the fridge since last Thursday. I want to say.
Your fridge is probably too cold then.
Yeah, I think my fridge is too cold. So I'm trying to figure out. I know you can put it in water. I don't really want to do that. I don't know. I don't know if this is a bad idea, but I was kind of like letting it sit on the counter for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then putting it back in the fridge for a little bit and then taking it out. I don't know if that's going to kill my whole family with a foodborne illness, but it's a risk I'm willing to take in order for the turkey to be good.
DQ wrote into us on Patreon, says, anybody who claims to love eating turkey is lying, and I can prove it. They like to deflect with baseless accusations, typically claiming you or your family doesn't know the right way to cook it. This is, of course, Dustin's fallback. Yeah. I asked these turkey defenders this: when is the last time you cooked or even ate a prepared turkey? If the answer is the previous Thanksgiving, how could one possibly believe you? Let's say during one of your pizza conversations, Dustin mentions he only eats pizza on September 19th every year. Wouldn't you think maybe he doesn't really think pizza is as good as he's saying? If turkey was as good as people pretend, they would make the effort to eat it more than once a year. Turkey is terrible. Let's stop pretending otherwise. Thank you for listening to this narration of my TED Talk. Now, I think that's extreme. I don't think turkey's terrible. I think turkey is good and it can be really good. But there is a point to be made. Mm-hmm. Are you eating turkey just randomly around, March 7th, 2023, you're going to make a turkey?
No. And here's why. If you make a turkey the right way, it's not fucking easy, okay? It takes many hours. In fact, tomorrow I'll probably be up at 7 a.m. getting things prepped in order to get the turkey in by 8 a.m. And then it requires maintenance every 30 minutes to kind of like, you use
you gotta baste it.
Yeah, you got to baste it. Baste it real good, trust me. Every 30 minutes. And it takes a lot of effort. So yeah, I make it once a year. And let me tell you, here's the thing. Some people, this also goes to the argument where people are like, oh, we should have eggnog all year round. We should have, this holiday thing all year round. It's like, no, if we have these things all the time, they become less special. And so turkey is very special because you have it once a year and your efforts, depending on what you put in, pay off. So I completely reject this. I think it is wrong. And DQ. I mean, stand down. And don't write in for at least a month.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's fair enough. Yeah. I'll try to make mental note of that. Yeah. I eat turkey constantly, but I eat boar's head.
Oh,
pepper turkey.
Boar's head, man. Yeah.
So they're doing all the hard work, man. I mean, actually, I haven't worn it yet for some reason. For my birthday, Micah bought me got me a custom-made boar's head shirt.
I helped with that a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's what she told me. So that's I gotta wear that at some point. It's going to be a little tight. Probably shirt. Not going to be able to wear it more than once because it's a medium and I'm getting bulky in the chest. So
you're getting the good kind of bulky.
Yeah, I still have a little bit of a pot belly. Not so bad, but I'm getting way more muscular and it's making my things fit differently, and way more muscular in regard to how I was, which was womanly. I saw someone in the background. Is someone here? Oh, hello.
In your house?
Yeah.
Is Dagan there?
No. He's at my sister Allie's right now. Oh. I'll see him later today. He'll be here on Friday, I think. And then we're going to dinner that night. Why? What's so funny? What's funny about that?
When you said that, I thought that you meant that there was someone in my background.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, that'd be awesome if like a serial killer came in, killed me while we were recording, and you saw it happen.
Yeah, and we all got
you'd
a
be
recording
traumatized for the rest of your life. Maybe, I don't know, but
it's so blurry for me right now because of the low latency that I wouldn't really be able to. I'd have to render it and see everything. But it would be like one of those YouTube, crime programs that I really like, dreading those kinds of things. Really good channels. Well, for Chris, we wish him well. It's funny because you guys will hear Sacred Symbols Plus. I guess the next episode, so the one that goes live the day after this goes live on Patreon. We did that with Cog. Maddie was out and Chris was out. And at that time, I was really giving Chris a hard time, being like, where is Chris? What is he doing? And it turns out he was at urgent care, tending to his life, I guess. So fair enough.
But he's fine, to be clear. Just even though he was at urgent care, maybe
he's fine. I don't know. I mean, I haven't talked to him in a couple hours, so
that's
we'll
true.
See. I think he said
anything could have happened.
He said he was going to sleep all day. He did say he's not going home anymore. Obviously, he was going to go to New York, and he's instead going to go for New Year's. So yes. Well, this is Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast. There's typically 3 of us, but 2 of us this week. Thank you for being here and welcome to our show. We go live each and every week, and you can get us 3 days early and ad-free over on Patreon, patreon.com/lastdaymedia. We really appreciate your support over there. Patreon numbers, like total Patreon subscribers, down. Patreon revenue, up. I don't understand how that is. Well, I understand how it's working. Everyone's loving the $5 tier.
Yes.
So we lose $1 subscriber, we lose a $2 subscriber. Hate to see you go. But everyone loves being at that $5 tier. I do know it's difficult out there right now. Recession or layoffs, difficult economy, inflation. I know not everyone out there, many of you out there can't support us, whether you don't want to or you can't. We appreciate you listening in any way you can and hope that you are doing well nonetheless. Couple of the perks, if you do support us on Patreon, of course, you get that early ad-free access, the ability to submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. This is a very fan-run podcast, as you will find out each and every week. You get access to our official Discord with more than 5,000 people. Sacred Symbols Plus, twice a week. Maddie and I just recorded a Trails and Cold Steel one. That will go live, I think, over the holidays. We just did, as I said, Sacred Symbols Cross-Defining Duke. The new episode of the Sacred League is up. The new episode of the Sacred Sales Saga, which you can play along at if you are on our Discord at sacredsalessaga.com. I interviewed Sandeep Rai, who we're going to talk about in a moment. The Last of Us Part 2, deep dive with Micah, and so on and so forth. We have new merch at lastdaymedia.store. Do you want to go into the rigmarole here?
Sure, yeah. Well, if you're listening to this on Friday, we are running a Black Friday sale right now, 10% off. And all the information, we have a tweet out. I'm trying to see. I have the actual promo code. I'll pull that up just so we can have that for people. But 10% off. And we have 3 special items in the store. Number 1, Crying Jim Ryan sticker, which I would show you, but I don't actually have one.
Hold on, I'll go get it.
Go get it. Yeah, so we've got a Crying Jim Ryan sticker. I believe we have 100 of those. So if you want to get one, get it fast. And we are putting limits this time because we've done that where people have bought like 3 or 4 of our limited stickers. And so we want to make sure that you can only get either 1 or 2 of them. I'm not sure. Okay, Colin's back. He's got Crying Jim.
Yeah, so here it is.
Let's see it for the video listeners. Dude, it's so big.
I know.
Man, that is...
It's like, here's like a pen, like my writing pen. And then here's how big it is.
Dude, I absolutely love it. So, Crying Jim, that's the most important thing. The 2 other things, both Pope stickers are being restocked. And this is also limited. Limited to, I believe, 100 each. So, if you want to get those, you can get them today. They are 10% off. And that's not just those stickers. That's everything in our store is 10% off. And let me get you that code. The code is... all capital letters, LSM Black Friday 22.
Nice. LSM Black Friday 22.
10% off.
Lastdaymedia.store. Very exciting.
That's correct.
Very exciting. Yeah, 10% off everything, like Dustin said. And remember, free shipping for domestic sticker shipping.
Yes.
So if you're in the US and you want stickers, we can send them to you free of shipping charges. What else? Go check out the Clips channel still if you would like. How are we doing over there? I haven't actually checked in all week.
Good. We just posted one today with Headlock basically cut down our entire God of War conversation into 10 minutes.
Oh, man.
So that'll be, I'm
That'd be nice
chasing the views.
for abuse.
I'm chasing the views here. You know, you got to take the good and the bad.
Oh, totally.
And so the clip from earlier this week is the clip about us talking about No Mercy for children in gaming. And the clip is like Chris laughing, and then there's a like meme. Well, it was like a meme video of this Ukrainian kid flipping out about video games, just crying on the thumbnail. It's very good. So, yeah, check us out over there. Sacred Symbols Clips.
All right, please do. And leave us nice reviews on iTunes, Spotify, etc. And so on. Last Stand live in Texas is getting close to being sold out, I think. Basically, only mezzanine seats, I think, are available now.
There are 5 floor seats left.
Nice. So
that's it.
Go check that out. You can find the link. Well, we have a tiny URL, right? Tiny URL. I don't remember what it is. Just go to the Patreon and you can find the link there. If
you search An Evening with Last Stand, you'll find it too. We have a post on our Patreon. So yeah, but here's the thing I want to tell people, Colin, is that if you go to our associate editor, Ben Smith, he posted a tweet that actually has a view from the balcony seating.
Looks pretty good.
Honestly, I think some of the seats up there are going to be better than the back of the floor. So if you feel discouraged because you did not get a floor ticket, I highly suggest peeping the upper seats because I think they're going to be great.
Can we be honest about something for a minute with just the ticket sale situation? Sorry, I was looking something up. So how many of you thought the show was sold out because you didn't read the instructions? This is like an example of maybe Darwinism in action. You know, those who read the instructions got their seats easily. I couldn't believe how many people just didn't read anything. They just clicked on the link and they're like, well, you can't buy tickets. I'm like, did you read the post? Read the post. There are probably still people out there that think it was sold out immediately. It wasn't. It's still not sold out. But it will, I think, sell out. And so we hope to see you there in Houston in February. And I think that's basically it. Oh, I wanted to read this because we have an exciting opportunity in Texas. Ambitious Casual wrote in and said, greetings, Father Colin and altar boys Chris and Dustin. I was beyond excited when I found out that Last Stand was coming to my home state of Texas. But when I realized the show is exactly 1 week after the expected due date of my firstborn son, sadness came over me. I looked to the Church of Sacred Symbols for answers. Should I leave my son and wife behind to fend for themselves to meet all of you, or should I take my boy to be baptized by Father Colin himself? I mean, there's a lot of exciting opportunities and possibilities here for us to perhaps do our first baptism, which would be incredibly sacrilegious, but we could do it nonetheless. Would you like to do that?
Well, yeah, but so I don't know. I'm trying to think about the baptism. Like, is it Duke's Mayo? If you're doing it, like a baptism by Mayo, there is the Mountain Dew thing would be too overplayed. That wouldn't be good. But
what I would do is I would baptize him the traditional Catholic way, but wear a Shuhei Yoshida mask.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Now, in all seriousness. Here's the thing. I don't have a kid of my own. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what week 1 is like, but surely you can get away for a few hours if you need to. Right?
It's dangerous. I would imagine, who knows? I don't think moms like to be left alone after a week with their kids if they can help it. But who knows? We can treat it like 1950. I mean, you're lucky you're there at all.
Right. And when you are there, you're smoking the cigarette, blowing it in the baby's face.
Right.
You know?
It reminds me of when Don Draper had, or not, was it Don? Yeah, when they have their third kid, the third kid is the other dad's. I'm trying to think. There's a scene in Mad Men where they go to I can't think of what it is, but they go to like an ER and it's 2 dads that are there and they're just getting drunk in the.
Oh yeah, they're in the waiting room while the thing they're getting the baby out. So during the birth,
right?
They're just hanging out.
Yeah, I don't know why that came to mind. It's probably because I think about that show all the time. Okay.
Yes.
Let's move on. Things to get into, of course, PlayStation news and all the rest, but we have a few things I'd like to discuss first. Let's get our legs loosened a little bit. Correction before we get into anything, though. Sandeep Rai wrote into us, and of course, I promised I'd get back to Sandeep. Sandeep is the one writing It Only Did Everything, the PlayStation 3 book that's being kickstarted right now. I am writing in that book. I have nothing to gain. I had turned down payment for that book, so I am not sending it to you because I have anything to gain. It's just a really cool project, so you can check that out if you want. But he wrote in, he said, hey boys, I have a bit of a correction from last week's show. Colin mentioned the global games industry revenue had not previously declined. I'd actually said it had not previously declined since the early 80s. It fell around 10% from 2008 to 2009. This was caused by dwindling PS2 hardware and software sales, which were not sufficiently offset by PS3, falls in PSP, Wii, and DS sales compared to 2008, partly due to the financial crisis and partly due to there being less must-have game releases. And 3, the rise of digital games with no reliable data at the time to measure revenue. Yeah, thanks for that, Sandeep. I actually, when I was talking about it last week, I was thinking, I think they're talking about the American industry because it is NPD. So I spoke out of turn, and I believe you are right. So thank you for that correction. What else we got going on here? Oh yeah, Born Blind wrote in. Said, greetings, sacred squeakers and old man Colin. I too have a young 5-year-old son named Oliver who may one day join the battalion. My son lives several hours away, so I'm always on the lookout for podcasts that are more kid-friendly to listen to when we make the long drive back and forth. We have at times listened to Sacred Symbols, but to be completely honest, the show has become a bit of a minefield for obscenities and adult-themed humor. Personally, I wouldn't have it any other way, but his mom is a bit of a square, and I can't have him going home talking about fucking chickens and telling her to stand down, etc. I know it's a long shot, but is there any chance of having some sort of either clean show or an edited version of the existing shows that's a little more tame for his mom's fragile little ears? Yeah, look, Born Blind, let me just get it. Let's just do that for you. We're going to do that just for you. Well, we're going to change up everything. We're going to record a different podcast. We're going to edit it differently. We'll upload it to a different RSS stream. Like I'm Capitol Records making a clean record. Yeah. And we'll send that over to you as soon as we can.
I have 2 comments about this write-in. First of all, he says the show has become a bit of a minefield. And I find that a bit of a ridiculous statement. This show, I mean, what was it? Was it episode 1 or 2 that was talking about sacrificing babies? I mean, this is the Sacred Symbols way. And there has been no other way than a minefield of obscenities and adult-themed humor. Now, the other thing, this brought its attention to the idea of like a clean show. I don't know if people realize this. Sacred Symbols records at 1 p.m. normally on Thursdays and releases at noon. Audio and video, finely edited audio version, the video version. It just simply, there would be no time to make not only an audio clean version, but a lot of people ask us about doing B-roll, like putting game clips over what we're discussing. I think that would be cool, but it's just simply not possible in that time frame. We want to get this show to you as fresh and as high quality as possible, and just wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, and I'm also just totally opposed to doing B-roll because it exposes us to copyright striking.
That's the other thing.
Claiming our videos, which I'm just not even. That's never gonna happen. I'm sorry, unless we have like some sort of like foolproof way out there. I know some of you want that, and even if we had the time and inclination to do something like that, it just exposes us to getting our shit claimed. And that's not acceptable to me. So we just don't. Remember, I leaked Tomb Raider on a podcast and they tried to copyright strike it. So imagine showing just videos of things. I don't know. They're assholes out there, everyone. Anyway, Born Blind, sorry we couldn't erect a separate pipeline just for your needs. I'm only kidding. I'm busting your balls. The show is not ever going to be clean, and there will never be an edited version of the show. I'm sorry to say. I remember at IGN when we were doing Podcast Beyond, it used to be explicit. And then I don't know if old fans remember, it became a clean show. And it was really difficult to do. It's just not how I talk. I have a bad mouth. And they say people with that curse are more honest. Have you ever read that?
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Let's see. Let's hear from someone out there in the crowd working. Jared R. Meyer wrote in. Said, hey, CDC, I work as a DoorDash driver on the side for extra cash and always listen to you guys while doing it to make the time pass a little faster. Actually, I usually find myself so engrossed that it doesn't really feel like work, more like I'm just driving around with while my friends chat. I thought it'd be fun to see how much I make in a typical Sacred Symbols episode, so I tracked it down for the last 4 weeks and found out that on that time I average $155.67 per episode. Granted, Saturdays during peak when I listen is by far my highest earning time. Just thought you guys would like to know what you're literally worth to me. Thanks for all you do. It's fun to think that we're keeping you company while you're delivering your food, your parcels. I haven't used DoorDash here. I used to use it in California. Stay safe out there. God, they used to drive me nuts, actually, some of them. You know who used to drive me nuts, though? Were the people who would order from them. You went to my old apartment building in Santa Monica. I don't care. I don't fucking live there anymore. It's at the corner of Colorado and 6th in Santa Monica. It's a really nice apartment building there. And people used to come and then people would order from the 5th floor or whatever, and then just wait for these people to try to figure out their way in. And then you have to use the thing on the elevator, like just total disregard for these people. And I used to go outside and like wait for them. You know, like here I am and just hand the food off and it's a big quick transaction. What used to get me mad was when they couldn't find the big ornate building. And they'd be like, I'm outside. And I'm like, no, you're not. That's the kind of stuff that annoys me. Don't be like that. I'm wagging my finger, Jared. But stay safe out there and keep making your money. Keep grinding. Grind mindset. Youngman.jpg wrote in. Said, fellas, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to the whole LSM squad for inspiring me to stop waiting around and take the plunge into the games industry. I've had sacred symbols and defining Duke in my ears for about 1.5 years, and last spring I left my job with no backup plan to pursue a game dev position. I'm happy to report that I am starting as a software engineer at a AAA studio imminently. Side note, Colin, we shared the same alma mater. Is that right? Anyone who knows me knows that if you say that to me, you got my attention. So that's how you got on the show today, in addition to having a nice little factoid about your life. Love to hear it. My advice for others listening to youngman.jpg, don't quit with no backup plan.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
You know, I appreciate the gusto. It worked out for you. It probably works out for a lot of people that do that because it has that sort of imminent energy where it's like, I'm going to fucking starve to death if I don't figure this out. So I appreciate that, but you can do both. So be careful out there. Congratulations to you, youngman.jpg. Happy to meet another husky as always. Joshua Linkus wrote into us and said, hello, CDC. I have listened to Sacred Symbols for a while and I have noticed an interesting quirk. He says quark, but it's quirk. When one person speaks, the other remains silent until the speaker has completely finished their thought. Everyone gets a chance to rebuttal, again in full with little to no interruption. Many other podcasts with 3 or more people are filled with incomplete thoughts and interrupted sentences. Is this a conscious decision you all make, a rule that Colin institutes, or generally good practice for podcasting that you have all learned over the years? Keep up the good work and thank you for the great content. I think it's a little bit of both. I remember telling everyone on several times, I'm like, get off the mic. You know, like when people are talking, just don't talk. That's like the only rule. That's the rule if you're doing podcasts in person. But just get off the mic. Let people talk. Now, you have to interrupt sometimes. You have to edge in, try to read people's visual language, see like what their body language, see what if they want to come in or cut in. And every once in a while, there'll be crosstalk. But I agree. It's actually annoying to listen to those kinds of podcasts. And it's not hard to not stay out of each other's way, in my opinion. Even with distance where we have like a half a second of latency between us, I still feel like there's enough time to let people say their piece. And that's the thing about having no time limit and also just doing whatever we want, is that there's enough time to cover everything completely. You don't have to rush to get in your thoughts, in other words, as well. So go on and say what you need to say. How do you feel about that? That's a nice compliment. Because I listen to some great podcasts, by the way, that crosstalk quite often. And it's like, and they're in person. And I'm like, right, you guys got to stop. No one wants to hear that. Let people speak and then go on and enough with the artificial time limits. Shows should be as long. This is the internet. Shows should be as long as they need to be. And that's it. And that's all. Dustin.
Yeah, definitely. I totally understand the crosstalk thing. I mean, for certain shows, I'm sure if it's like a comedy show where people are riffing on one another. I mean, we certainly have crosstalk when it calls for it on this show, but it is nice to be able to just say everything you need to say. And I feel like that's usually, I think when we cover something, we kind of each say what we need to say and then have some more back and forth after that where we can kind of fully discuss things. So I think that we've definitely kind of started to really nail this down. And for the past, I don't know, maybe year or so, but it was definitely, we had to transition into that. When you move to 2 to 3 people, it's kind of more difficult since it's no longer just a simple bounce back and forth. And Colin, you do a good job of just making sure that, you know who's supposed to talk, because I've been in other podcasts where just like if you're guesting on a show, if you're in a show with like 3 or 4 people where the host be like, so what do you think about XYZ? And then all 3 people don't know whether they should say something because they're all worried, 3 people will try to talk at the same time. And it's like, if there's someone kind of pointing in the direction of the conversation, that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think I can always be better at everything I do, but I think that I've surpassed the 10,000 hour mark of mastery of podcasting and video and all of that. I mean, I've been on so many shows over the past since I think I did my first podcast in 2007. I mean, you get good at it, but I also think that it's just a matter of like organization in your mind. I'm like really OCD. And so I just try to lean into that a little bit because I think it makes for a tighter and more interesting show. And some people bust my balls because I'll often say like, Dustin, I'm going to go to you next. And then I'll talk for another minute. But the reason that I do that is to like spark your mind that it's coming to you, so that I don't say something for 2 minutes and say, so Dustin, what do you think? And then you're like, well, at least it gives you a time to collect yourself. So there's a purpose behind the way we do things. And I'm glad that that's shining through. I like our show to be silly and stupid and all of that, informative, certainly. But yeah, the crosstalk production value is important. Just with audio, I don't really care about video quality, to be honest with you. I'm on a 1080p webcam. I really could give a shit less about that, but just audio quality so people can listen to it, because that's the universal way we all absorb it, right?
Yeah, I can't, that's the thing. And my recommendation to people always, when people talk about starting podcasts, obviously you want to have a good flow, and that takes time and practice. But audio quality, don't use your headset microphone if you're doing a regular podcast. We have guests that do that, and that's fine because they're not set up to do that. But there's nothing worse than if you start a YouTube video or a podcast and the audio quality is bad. Like I instantly click off. I'm like, I can't do that. That's audio is often more important than video when it comes to things like that. So keep your audio quality on point. Yeah,
totally essential. Totally. That's why we have Shure, like the expensive Shure mics, and it's an investment, but it really doesn't get any better than this. What's the thing about this is it wasn't Thriller recorded on this mic?
On this type of mic, yeah.
Yeah, which is cool. What do you think about it? All right. Moms Like Me, who has an Islanders logo, so that always catches my eye on Patreon. He says, and this is a tough one, would you rather only have one more day to live in the United States or have a long and healthy life living in Europe? Would you rather have one more day to live in the United States or have a long and happy, healthy life living in Europe? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying is it's a life of shame at that point, because we'd have to give in in order to survive. And, the cuisine over in Europe, half of it's based on a dare usually. And
what's going on over there with the food? I need to know.
It could be tough. It could be extremely tough. I'm kind of a picky eater, and I don't want to eat haggis or black pudding or
we're gonna get back into this again.
Yeah, dude, the British people too. So I mentioned the food eating, the challenge guy that I watch, Beard Meets Food, and they'll just eat crushed tomatoes with breakfast, just some crushed tomatoes.
Yeah, they like tomatoes with their eggs and like their bangers and beans. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember the first time I had breakfast it's funny you say that, because the first time I had breakfast in Britain, it was eggs, beans, sausages, like, and toast and tomatoes, like that were on the grill or like on the stovetop or something. So they're like, they're hot, but they're like about to burst or whatever. And it was good. But then you see things, it was actually really good. But then you see things in, like, there was a picture going around of a guy eating oatmeal with toast. Did you see this? And it's like, dude, that doesn't sound bad at first. But if you find this picture, it's like, what someone I think wrote, these motherfuckers are eating what we fed horses in World War I think was the was like the tagline or whatever. And or that they fed horses in World War I. Although we were in World War I too, I guess. But I don't know, why are we we're just really going at Europe lately. And then we're causing this dynamic sort of consternation where we're talking about Europe in the totality of the continent as we know it, but that the British really don't consider themselves European. And so they're not happy that we're including them in all of this. And you know what's exciting, not exciting, it's not exciting at all. What's interesting, I've been reading about this recently, is that I think during the last ice age, so like 10,000 years ago, when there was, much more ice and so the water levels were lower, Europe and mainland Europe and UK were one landmass.
Right.
I think there was something called Doggerland or something, which was like another island. And so they're just lucky that we melted those ice caps, or that the carbon melted those ice caps over the last 10,000 years, or they would all be one and the same and there would be no differentiation between them.
Right. Yeah, dude, the thing right now that's really bothering me is that Holly on YouTube, she watches all these home renovation type things. And I feel like a lot of the ones she watches are, these British people. The one she watches consistently is these people, they're fixing up a convent in France, these British people. I'm like, what is it with all these British people are leaving to go to France to build homes and stuff? Is there something going wrong in the UK? This whole Brexit deal, maybe? I don't know. I'm not trying to be, I don't know anything about it. It's not political, but I don't know, man.
They hate the French traditionally. So something's amiss.
Thumbs
But
up.
yeah, nonetheless, I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I appreciate you writing it in. Sacred Symbols is sponsored by Feels and their amazing CBD. Want to feel better, sleep more soundly, and have a freer and more unencumbered mind? Find out more right now at feels.com/symbols. So there are two acronyms most closely associated with marijuana, THC and CBD. THC is its own thing. It's typically what gets you really high, and it has its own host of uses, some more practical than others. Hey, to each their own. But when it comes to CBD, marijuana's other fundamental offering, what we have is a mass-use substance that virtually anyone can utilize with beneficial effects and virtually no downside. See, CBD stands for cannabidiol, and when used via, say, Feels Premium CBD Tincture, it can help you sleep better, escape anxiety and stress, and even mitigate physical aches and pains. CBD has real staying power because so many people have had the benefit through firsthand experience to know for themselves, hey, this actually works. Imagine, if you will, a long day toiling at work. You're a physical laborer and your body needs a break. By taking a few drops of Feels CBD Tincture, or perhaps even one of their discreet CBD mints, you can help rid your body of aches and pains gnawing away at you when you're trying to relax. Or picture, if you will, someone like me, a podcaster who lives a very lucky life. Still, I'm an anxious wreck most of the time, and I have trouble sleeping too. Feels CBD has come through in the clutch so many times for me at this point that it's hard not to recommend. I've even turned family members onto it so they can see the benefits of premium Feels CBD for themselves. Now, I know this all sounds a little intimidating to some of you, and that's understandable enough. The video game man is trying to sell me marijuana. Well, I guess that's kind of true. But Feels CBD is perfectly legal, incredibly effective, and if you're new to the wonderful world of CBD, Feels even stabs a helpline with real people. Can you believe it? They'll help guide you to the dosages and products that make the most sense for you. And if you become a Feels member, well, all of these benefits will flow with nary a second thought. Good listeners of Sacred Symbols, it's time to start feeling better with Feels. Become a member today by going to feels.com/symbols. That's feals.com/symbols. And you'll get 40% off your first 3 months with free shipping. That's feels.com/symbols to become a member and get 40% automatically taken off your first 3 months with free shipping. Again, to feel better the all-natural way, head to feels.com/symbols. Sacred Symbols is brought to you by BetterHelp, super effective online therapy that you can explore for yourself at betterhelp.com/symbols. A lot of us play a common game in life, especially as we get older. Something happens, we're busy and bogged down, we let it fester, and before you know it, you've got a real problem on your hands. When I experienced my so-called canceling in 2017, I ran away from the pain and trauma it caused me for several years. I had so much else going on in my life, I barely had time to compute anything at all, so I didn't. And when I finally sat down with a professional to get it all off my chest, let's just say that it all flowed like water hurtling down a fall. My healing experience could be yours, except I'm presenting to you tools I didn't even know existed at the time, particularly in the form of BetterHelp and its take on completely online therapy. See, with BetterHelp, you don't have to go anywhere to talk to a qualified therapist. Due to the wonders of the internet, a therapist will instead come to you, whether via video or audio or even through text. This frankly no-brainer convenience is a game changer for those seeking therapy, especially for those on a budget. That's because BetterHelp is also way more affordable than traditional in-person therapy. In-person and lots of money, two things that would keep many of us from doing many things, let's be honest. But for those in pain, understand that pain is human. Whether you lost your job or are experiencing a breakup, whether you're having issues with family or your partner, or perhaps just feeling sad and lost, it's all manageable. Use the amazing tools at your fingertips. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month of sessions at betterhelp.com/symbols. That's BetterHelp.com/symbols. That's betterhelp.com/symbols to begin helping yourself. Sacred Symbols is brought to you by Chime, the award-winning banking app and suite of basic banking features available to you right now at chime.com/sacred. In the adult world, your finances are everything. If you take care of your money will in turn take care of you. My friends at Chime offer a selection of services that literally anyone with a job, a car, an apartment, whatever, should have locked down. Whether you need a basic checking account or perhaps a savings account or even a debit and ATM card that can be used fee-free at thousands of locations around the US, Chime can help you out. And with neat features like fee-free overdrafts up to $200 in value and access to your paycheck 48 hours early, Chime can help you keep your bills straight, your money in order, and your financial house kept, tidied, and secure. Listen, if you want to interact with the modern world of commerce, then you're going to need a bank account. You're going to have a debit or credit card to buy things online. You're going to have a solid credit score to get loans in the future for bigger purchases like a car or a house. or even just to rent an apartment. You cannot avoid the world of banking, but you can embrace it in a modern, safe, and responsible way, and Chime can help you do just that. See for yourself why Chime is so loved at chime.com/sacred. That's chime.com/SACRED. Again, for a checking account, savings account, debit card, credit card, banking app, and more, head to chime.com/sacred. Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bancorp Bank or Stride Bank N.A. members FDIC. Early access to direct deposit funds depends on payer. SpotMe eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. See chime.com/spotme. Chime was the 2021 #1 most downloaded banking app in the US according to Apptopia. And Kuhn wrote in finally and said, "Hello, my sexy sacred swine. I couldn't think of anything video game related, so here goes something different. What do you guys think is the meaning of true happiness? As Kolinoff notes, it's scary out there these days. I've experienced quite a bit of turmoil lately, both personal and professional, and I've had a lot of time to dwell on the bigger questions. Just hoping I can get your takes, perhaps hot on the heels of a discussion about child gamer suicide bombers." No, we went into that. That wasn't a discussion. It was merely a suggestion. One of a universe of possibilities that we could potentially pursue. But Dustin, before we get into the game news, what is the true meaning of happiness?
I mean, obviously happiness is going to differentiate between person to person. So I can only speak from my own experience. And the thing for me that really kind of changed my mindset on life was for so many years, basically really from the time from you're a kid, you're working towards that next step. You're like, oh, what my life when I'm in high school, my life when I'm in college, when I get to there, I'll be able to do this. And then you get there and you find the next goal. And then for a lot of years for me, it was like, oh, when I finally get the job that I want. And then, you get the job or maybe you don't. And I realized looking back that I spent a lot of time feeling like my life had to be on pause because I had to get to the next step before I could truly live. And the thing that was really important to me was realize is that life isn't what you're going to do. It's what you're currently doing right now. So don't wait for everything. Like feel like you have to be prepared in some way. Obviously there are things that you need to prepare your life for, but you got to just live and do the things you want when you can. Just because, first of all, you don't know if what you're getting to will ever happen. And then if you get there, you don't know if it's really going to be what you want it to be. So stop waiting to be truly happy and do what you need to do to be happy right now.
Well said. Wow, you should be a self-help guru.
That's something I've thought about a lot. Just this idea.
Being a self-help guru?
No. About just what I said, just about, I don't know, constantly trying to achieve the next goal. And you can put other things on pause. And it's not necessarily worth doing that.
I'm at a point in my own life where I'm kind of done climbing, I think. I do believe, so I think it depends on what you want. I think it's a good idea if you want to be secure in your life and you want to have some freedom and some opportunity and some choice to really sacrifice your 20s. I do believe that. This idea that you should just immediately start living this amazing life and just do it's unreasonable. And I sacrificed a lot of my 20s for professional gain, and I'm glad I did. I look back and I wish that maybe I did a little bit more and I was a little more social and all those things, but the reality is it worked. So I just, I want people to find that balance, because what makes a person happy, one person happy will not make the other person happy. Some people are totally content, as they say, working to live, right? That's the saying. And I am not that person. So it's hard for me. So it's hard for me to give advice or the meaning of happiness to me. See, I think a lot of it, and this is going to get serious and deep, but I think a lot of what I'm seeking stems from my parents getting divorced when I was 7. And I was split apart from the cohesion that my 3 siblings, who are all older than me, my brother's 11 years older than me, all with the same parents, the cohesion that they had was ripped away from me. And so I think that the thing that I've always sought is just total security, financial security, job security, educational security, social security, not social security in the way it is, but being secure in not social security like we have in the United States, but being socially secure in one's culture and one whatever. And that's why I'm such a homebody, I think, is because I'm like, no, fuck it. I was dragged around everywhere, 2 fucking holidays, every holiday, going here and there, playing travel hockey, doing all this, going to school away, living in California, all those years, all of that. And so my answer to you, Kuhn, is the true, for me, the true meaning of it is contentness. And I think sometimes people confuse those two words. And I also think the definitions internally are different for people with those two words. I think happiness is fleeting. I think the feeling of happiness is not a perpetual feeling. I am confused by people who are happy. That doesn't make any sense to me. Am I sad? Sometimes, but I actually think I'm generally content. And when I find that fleeting moment of happiness, I'm out at a good meal, I'm engrossed in a good movie at the theater. I'm having a great conversation with my fiance. I'm playing a game. These are all fleeting things that bring you happiness, but brings you to raises your level of being to a content state, which I kind of feel like is the best state, or what all you can ask for, I guess I should say, is being like, yeah, things are good. That's what I always wanted. And so that's my answer to that. Things are getting difficult out there. A lot of people really connected with what we talked about last week with that guy and his girlfriend breaking up and all of that. This is another thing I want people to internalize. It's just, you have to define it for yourself. But Dustin, you are very wise because you're young. I'm almost 10 years older than you. I have really only learned in the last few years the true meaning of passing time. Where I'm like, oh, because I look back and I'm like, man, remember, God, that was so funny when that happened in college. And then I'm like, that was 20 years ago. Oh man, remember when I got hired at IGN? That was so wild. And it was 15 years ago. It's like, I don't know where the time's gone. So very well said to you as well, my friend. Do you have anything else to say before we move on?
No, I mean, that's the thing, thinking about the passage of time. It's a blessing and a curse, obviously, because you want to be thankful for either what you've accomplished and the life you live now. But it is crazy. It just continually moves faster. It's like, you don't want to think about it too much. It's good to think back and appreciate, but if you think too much about time passing, it's not going to put you in a good spot. Yeah,
I agree. I'm a very nostalgic person, and I get caught up in, as people know, and I get caught up in a very specific feeling that I get in my chest, often late at night when I'm in bed, when I think about old things that have happened, or a moment or a memory, this ephemera from your life. It's when you ever stop and just think about, like, this is such a stoner thing, but do you ever just stop and think about the act of being, in the sense of self-awareness, like just how much that in and of itself is an evolutionary quantum leap?
Yeah.
That like dogs don't know they exist. They don't think about it. They have no concept of anything beyond their immediate surroundings, their relationships, their experiences. And that alone, I think, is a haunting thing for humanity to kind of carry with it. This idea that you can just, and how evolutionary it is. You think about cringy moments because that's your mind telling you, don't ever do that again.
Right.
Like that I love that kind of shit. Like it's your body trying to make you stronger. And I always just think about that stuff.
That's the thought of, is consciousness is humanity's greatest blessing and curse. So we were able to achieve so much, but we have to live with this burden of knowing of not only our own mortality, but everybody you interact with and people that you love also. It's it's definitely a stoner thing to think about, but it can be helpful to think about as well, I think.
Oh, I love it. I love philosophy and all of that. As they say on my favorite podcast around the NFL, save it for the theology show. But I will say this, that I think we are entering an interesting historic moment in humanity. You and I might just miss it in our lives, where, although I think we might not, where consciousness is going to be digital. And I really believe that death will be an option in 50 years, something like that. And what I mean by that is that I believe you will be able to make replications of your consciousness. such that you could actually have multiple versions of yourself running that are unaware of each other doing totally different things. And I get excited about that in the sense of like, imagine if you didn't have to make choices and you said, I always have this dream of going to Mars. I always kid around with Michael. Like I would go on a suicide mission to Mars, I think. If you would just let me go, I probably want to get a little older and do a little more in my life, but we'll see what happens. And it was like, what if I didn't have to make that choice? What if I could just upload my consciousness in some way and go and experience it as me? But there's just a separate me that's not doing that. A Gemini man style situation, as it were.
Yeah.
I don't think we're too far away from that. And it scares me a little bit because I think people will be able to see your secrets. I think people will be able to see your dreams, what you think. It's crazy, scary, and fun. And on that note, let's move on to the games news of the week for PlayStation. Let's start with some God of War discussion. It's just the two of us today. So I guess, we usually do what we're playing and all of that, but we'll just talk about God of War generally, I guess, as we go. And if we get to that later and we still want to have more to say about that, we can do so.
Sure.
So the first thing I want to share with you, Dustin, and the audience is that today, just before we started recording, PlayStation announced that God of War Ragnarok has surpassed 5.1 million copies sold through its first debut week. It's the fastest selling first party launch in PlayStation history, and of course a God of War franchise record as well. The game sits at 94 on Metacritic. People really like it. What do you think of those sales numbers? A lot of people are responding I'm looking on social media in the comments saying, this is why you sell games. People buy games. If you make good games, great games, people will buy them, and they will buy them for $70. And just back of the envelope math, $350 million in revenue out of 5 million copies, give or take. I mean, that's paid for the game, paid for the marketing, and probably half funded the next game already. Not so bad for Sony Santa Monica.
No. Not bad at all. I think that this ensures the future, of course, of more God of War. Whether or not, this is kind of the end of this current arc, I would definitely expect there to be something. I don't know what that is, but I think we can expect that for sure. But fastest selling first party launch ever. That's definitely also interesting too, just because at 5.1 million. It's interesting, too, to compare it just because we just did our Sacred Sales saga, some spoilers for that. But we were discussing about the possibility of like which one will sell more this month, Call of Duty or God of War. And it just goes to show, too, that even at PlayStation's fastest selling first party launch, it doesn't even come close to Call of Duty or even I think Nintendo. It's 5.1 million. I'm trying to think as far as some Nintendo numbers, how that compares as well. But and I'm not trying to undercut, but it's an interesting thing to think about how that compares in that way. But yeah, congrats to them. I think it's a great game. And exciting for that studio to not just have, I'm sure that there was some concern. They had a big comeback with God of War 2018. And I'm sure the pressure was absolutely immense just because they had kind of had some rocky history before that. And they proved themselves as not just a one-hit wonder return with 2018.
Well, on that note, a few other pieces of news God of War Ragnarok related came out. A couple of them have emerged from Kind of Funny's Gamescast spoiler cast that they did with Eric Williams, who's the director and a longtime employee, obviously at Santa Monica, going all the way back to the beginning of God of War in 2005. He is the director of this game. This is his directorial debut, and he did a spoiler cast with Kind of Funny, my old company, on my old podcast, P.S. I Love You, XOXO. And according to thegamespoof.com, Eric Williams was asked by the hosts if there will be DLC. And he says, quote, "I don't know, man. The game is big. I think we put everything we had into it, so I wouldn't count on it," end quote. So that is a no. He's media trained, so certainly he had permission to say as much. I wonder what you think of that. At 40 plus hours for the campaign, as I understand, plus probably another 10 or so if you want to platinum it. So maybe a 40 to 50 hour platinum, depending on your expediency. I feel like this is not unreasonable. And I'm starting to question, although I've long questioned the value of DLC that comes along after a game comes out. Sometimes in open world role playing games like Cyberpunk or The Witcher, Fallout 4, I feel like those things make a little more sense because the world is so big. Like when Fallout 3's Point Lookout, for instance, which was dope. I don't know if people remember, that's when you went to Maryland, as I recall. And that was a whole different map. So it's just like, oh yeah, I'm doing this thing. And I felt like that was the case, I think, with Frozen Wilds with Horizon. But then I think there's these DLC packs where I wonder, what is the point of going back to this? Can't we just leave things alone and let them just be? What else is there to say? So you've beaten the game, God of War, or are you not done? You have.
I have beat it, yes.
So do you feel like there is without spoiling it, obviously, we'll do a review discussion and spoiler cast for this game after Thanksgiving. So don't worry there. We'll get deep into it and we're not going to spoil anything on this show. But having beat it, do you feel like there's a position to have some sort of DLC, whether it's a prequel, whether it's a concurrent story, whether it's an epilogue of some sort?
It's certainly possible that they could do a DLC. I mean, you look at like Horizon, they did the Forbidden Wilds expansion where they just kind of had Aloy go to a new area and do something that was interesting to the story of the world. To my understanding, I didn't play it, but it wasn't essential content by any means. And certainly that would be possible with God of War Ragnarok, but I definitely don't think it's necessary. I think this idea that every game needs to have some kind of expansion or DLC is an odd one, just because, like you said, it seems like they really put everything that they would want to say into this game. On howlongtobeat.com, the completionist hour count is 48 and a half hours, which
that's a long time.
Is definitely a long game if you want to beat everything. And so I'm totally fine with this. You know, this was a premium PlayStation $70 game. It is absolutely worth that, I would say, in all aspects, whether it's the quality of the game, the hour count, it kind of checks all of those boxes. So I'm perfectly happy with them moving on to the next thing, whatever that is. Go ahead and get started working on that, because I would way rather that come either sooner or be bigger and better than get a DLC of something that is cool. Usually that's the thing about DLC, is that we think about some of the great DLCs out there, and there are some that feel absolutely essential. You think about the BioShock 2 DLC that was really, really good. It's slipping the name of it's slipping my mind.
Burial at Sea.
Burial at Sea for Infinite.
Let me see. BioShock 1.
Minerva's Den.
No, that's BioShock 2.
Right. That's
I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Oh, you're good. So yeah, I feel like those are often kind of far and few in between, that I kind of just wish that the quick 4 to 5 hour $20 to $30 DLC is like, it doesn't totally feel like something that I want personally. So yeah, let's get them on to the next thing.
I generally agree. I feel like the team has to be willing to move on. I know Eric Williams, I think, told the LA Times that he would be happy to work on more God of War and for them to be a God of War team. But I think that is a really unwise thing for Sony to do to Santa Monica, because look at the experience that its rival Xbox has had by trying to nail developers to their games. I don't think it's smart, especially with 343. The Coalition's doing a good job, but like, don't they want to do something else? I don't know. Turn 10 seems to be the only one that really made any sense to me. And even Playground Games working on other things now, that aren't they making Fable or doing something else? So yeah, I feel like it's just a good idea for them to purge this. Even if they come back, just like purge it out of your system and do something else. They wanted to do something else a long time ago when they did that PS4 game that was canceled well into development. And so they have it in them to do something. And I've talked to Shannon Sudstill, who has left Santa Monica Studio, but she ran it for a long time. And I talked to her behind the scenes, I don't know, a few years ago maybe. And I said something along the lines of, don't you guys want to tell the story of that game as like an instructional thing? And they were thinking about it. At least that's what she said. Everyone knows it exists. So why not just talk about what went wrong? I think it could be really instructive. I think it would be a really awesome GDC, like keynote address, as it were, if they did something like that. Okay. Also from the same podcast on Kind of Funny Games, Eric Williams noted this. Now, this is exciting, although just a throwaway. I wouldn't get too excited about it, but he was asked, what would you like to make next? And he said that he would like to do Castlevania. I wonder what you make of that.
I feel like it makes total sense as far as you look at Kratos, his combat with the blades, and I don't know, this feels perfect. This feels like it would be absolutely perfect to have a modern Castlevania game kind of in the style of God of War. This sounds awesome. The biggest question, I mean, this is something I don't know, theorized or I've just talked about this idea of Konami handing over some of the licenses to someone that could do a excellent job. Someone like Sony can give it to some of their first party teams. And this feels like the match made in heaven. And so, yeah, I would absolutely love that. But I don't know. I don't expect Konami to do that, seeing how they're handling Silent Hill, which is not bad. It just seems like they're taking a very different approach by kind of bringing in some cheaper and less proven teams to work on that IP. So I wonder if they would do the same for Castlevania.
Yeah, my wonder here is, would Sony, would they be willing to use a first party asset on a IP they didn't own? Second party production's different. It would be cool if they made some sort of behind the scenes deal where they could get access to these various games from Konami. Konami and Sony do make sense together. And I hope that they're able to continue to extract stuff out of that. Silent Hill is one thing I don't really care, to be honest, about Silent Hill. Castlevania obviously is a totally beloved franchise in my world. And so it would be cool to see them do that. And I wouldn't mind seeing Santa Monica Studio take a stab at it. In fact, I would argue that God of War to me feels a lot more like what a Castlevania game could be than what I think God of War is. I mean, or what I would want God of War to be. I guess God of War is what it is. That's for sure. But there's a moment I'm about 10 hours into the game now. My dad was here last weekend, and now it's Thanksgiving, and like I have all this family here. So I'm just not having very much time to play recently. But I'm about 10 hours into God of War, and I will say that I played it last night, and there's an escape. You find a character and you escape out of this area, and you're like backtracking through it. And I was remarking to Micah, I was like, this is the first time I feel like the game actually let me play it. Like really play it. It was battle after battle after battle after battle after battle. Like you're swinging around and you're going down areas and all of this. And I was like, this is fun. Why isn't there more of this? So I'm hoping I see more of that as I continue the game in preparation for our spoiler cast. Sacred Symbols is sponsored by Tommy John and their amazing no wedgie guarantee, which you can learn more about right now at TommyJohn.com/sacred, where you can get 33% off your order. My friends, the holiday season is nigh, and it's time to identify good gift ideas for those in your life. And I may just have you covered. Now you know it, and I know it. I basically live my life in sweatpants. Them's the perks of CEO life, I suppose, but such a reality has made me a true stickler for comfort. I'm talking maximal comfort, the kind you get when you literally don't wear anything but t-shirts and pajama pants for a month straight. So when I learned that Tommy John was going to sponsor our show, I must admit I was extra stoked, because I know full well that Tommy John and Cozy go together like my beloved peanut butter and jelly. Grape, of course, strictly out of the jar. And so I knew that Tommy John and I would get along swimmingly. Now, these guys have loads of options for both men and women, but if I may focus in on the men in particular for a moment, we all know how far a good pair of underwear goes. And do you remember my earlier proclamation of a no wedgie guarantee? That's a real thing. Tommy John sells so much underwear, 18 million pairs and counting in fact, that they can make such promises and stick to them. And let's be real, no one wants to be picking fabric out of their ass at Christmas dinner. I cannot wait to try my own Tommy John loungewear set on for size, not just generally, but specifically at that Christmas dinner, where I will very much be comfortable, hands-free for eating, and of course copious drinking as well. And my family will no doubt be impressed, not only because I've left my house, but indeed because I saved 33% off my order and got free shipping by taking advantage of Tommy John's Cyber Monday sale right now. That's 33% off everything for men and women, from underwear to PJs to bras to shirts, literally anything on the site. My friends, it's nearly the holiday season, which means it's softness season. Join me in comfort, won't you? Shop Tommy John's Cyber Monday sale now. Get 33% off everything plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/sacred. That's TommyJohn.com/SACRED. It's one of Tommy John's biggest sales of the year. 33% off everything plus free shipping at TommyJohn.com/sacred. See site for details. And finally, I wanted to ask you about this story that was going around. Push Square wrote about it, but there's word from Twitter that Jessica Mao, who's a composer, pianist, she was an music intern at Sony Santa Monica, and apparently she did some pretty good work on parts of the game, but was uncredited. And she tweeted about this, and apparently, and I, for reasons totally unknown to me, I do not know why this is the case. It cannot be corrected in a patch. So, what do you think about that? About being left out, and the idea that developer credits are vital. Moby Games is currency in the games industry. And that's why we cite it all the time. If you're not credited, you're not going to be on there for that game. And that's like a make or break thing. Imagine this Jessica Mao chick being like, dude, I worked on God of War. And I can prove it because here is the credit for it. I think it goes a long way. And so I kind of feel bad for her. And I am confused why it can't be edited. Like, what is it about that? Because we don't have in the industry, I can understand a movie being uneditable or a TV show because of all the different unions and rules, but none of that exists in games. So every developer and publisher has their own rule set. Remember, people were left out of Red Dead Redemption 2 and were really mad about it. And they're like, we only credit people that finish the game. That's our rules.
Yeah.
But that's not the rule of the industry. And here, it was apparently you have to be on the team for a certain amount of time, which she wasn't. So what do you make of this?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I can understand in certain circumstances, certain people not being credited, whether it's a contract situation, whether it's a like intern type situation. In a perfect world, if it was up to me, everyone would get credited who worked on a game, right, or a movie. In fact, when I was an intern at a place in Pittsburgh, I worked on a feature film in a very small way, but I still worked on it, but I was never credited for it. And I think it's because I may not have been working on it in a legally, or I may have been working on it in a legally gray area. But to me, like, it's kind of annoying. It would be cool to have my name in the credits of a film, but I understand why that's not the case. So it sucks. But I feel like this is kind of just an unfortunate reality of the industry. And hopefully we can move in towards a direction where everyone is credited.
Yeah, I would like that as well. I'm confused as to why it can't be edited. It would obviously not be on the disc, but who cares? I mean, neither is Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Neither is the entire game. So what I don't see what is what I was saying. Like, music, I know music. The licensing and who arranged and wrote and mastered and mixed that shit is vital and nailed down pretty quick, and lawsuits litigate that over time. And that's really important to who gets paid. But there is no structure like that in games. It's the same thing with TV, where, there's a whole gamut of unionized run or union run funnels of money to the various people that worked on these things over time. That doesn't exist in games. That's why I'm just confused. I could see this being a bigger deal later, but the other thing is that if that existed in the industry and she would have been privy to that, that would have made this even more serious. So I do feel for her, but that this needs to be solved, because you see people complaining about this over and over again, and we really should come to some, I know that we're a very decentralized industry, but some sort of predicate for how we move forward, it would be nice on this. Okay. Let's see what else is here. To go back to my document. All right. Let's get into some other things. Dio Morrow wrote in, as well as many, many, many of you. And he said, hey, critically acclaimed 71 Metacritic podcast. Finally, Sony seems to have cracked down on platinum farming shovelware on PSN. Games media won't give you the props for blowing the whistle on them, but we all know the truth. Keep up the great works, gents. So a website called, I'm loading it now, dex.exe. So it's dex.exe.com. Not great. They leaked this document that went out to developers. Now, I can confirm that this is real. And this was acquired. We got this last month at Lilymo. The reason that I didn't want to talk about it was because that would be ill-begotten, because I got it from my connection at Lilymo. I didn't get it leaked to me. So that would be dishonest. So that's why I didn't be the one who leaked it. But since it has been leaked, I can confirm that it's totally real. And it says here that in part, actually, you know what? Before I even go to this, let me go. I'm going to the Lilymo Discord. Have I? Yeah, here it is. So yeah, we found about it on November 9th. So it actually wasn't that long ago. And here's what it says. And it's dated November 2nd, by the way. And this went out to all devs in PlayStation's ecosystem. It's closed wall garden ecosystem. If you publish games to PSN. Spam and duplicative content. SIE strives to ensure that customers can search and discover the full breadth of experience on PlayStation, and that partners have a fair means of being discovered. When partners oversaturate or spam PlayStation Store with many variants of the same type of content, it can negatively impact both the customer and partner experience. When SIE reviews the content submitted to PlayStation Store, products that have the following characteristics are identified as spam or repetitive content. Products whose functionality and or assets are copied but are not meaningfully different from products already published on PlayStation Store, irrespective of the publisher of record. Multiple concepts and product variants published by individual partners that have duplicative functionality or experiences, differentiated only by minor variances of functionality or assets, and more. And they sent this out in all languages. I'm reading it here in Japanese as well. So yeah, this is I'm trying to see here. So here's what happens if you break the content policy. Content excluded from PlayStation Store merchandising. Discoverability on PlayStation Store is restricted. Content does not feature in automatic merchandising placements. Content delisted from PlayStation Store if it's bad enough. Content is not searchable and can only be accessed via direct link on web and mobile stores. And it can even be taken down and you can be suspended or terminated. There is no evidence that any of this is happening yet, but it will take time for things to pass through certification. And I imagine we will see things have already have passed certification, are going to come out. So I imagine we'll see the fruits of this in Q1 of next year, and we'll see if it's actually working or not. I appreciate a lot of people, and I am curious about what you think of this, but also about this facet, Dustin, which is a lot of people wrote in and said, we know where this started. Do you think we had any influence on this?
I know that we were not the only ones championing this. Saw a lot of YouTube videos. I feel like I can say with confidence that we were among the first. At the very least, we were among the first to kind of really start to be like, what is going on here? And while I am very happy that this is happening, it's like, man, you really should have nipped this in the bud, Sony, because do you feel like, Colin, as a trophy person, that the metagame has already been tainted? Because they're not going to go and take away those trophies.
I think this is the thing, is that I really think they should. Like, I know it doesn't. I think that those games should be totally removed and everyone should be refunded. I don't think they should just take them. I don't think they should just take them away from you. They should just refund your money. And these guys have fucked the store up so bad. I am thrilled. A few people were writing in over time being like, it's messed up that you're kind of trying to put them out of business. And I'm like, no, I don't agree. I am actively trying to put those companies out of business. No doubt.
Sure.
So, fuck them. Fuck what they've done to the PlayStation Store. Fuck each of them individually. As people, fuck them as developers, fuck them as entrepreneurs, and fuck their games, fuck their trophies. I hope they fucking rot for what they did to the PSN. It hurts other developers. And it feels good to read what I've been saying and people have been telling me I'm wrong. That discoverability has been cratered. That a game like Super Perils of Baking, which is our newest game, which is an 8 on Metacritic, sold a fraction, not a small fraction, but like half of what our last game sold. And we are convinced that is because of discoverability. Because it got buried. So if you didn't know about it, you would never know about it. Where are you going to find it? Amongst Jumping Taco and fucking steering wheel simulator or something? It's
Stroke the Snake.
Fuck these guys, man. Fuck them. It has material effects on real game developers, and they are not real game developers. Those are not real games. They are not developers. They are fucking trash. And so I am glad to see Sony go after them, and I hope it fucking squeezes them into oblivion. I seriously do. Go find another market to fucking Appleize, because you're not doing it on PSN anymore. It's good that they finally come around. Microsoft, as I've said over and over again, has by far been the best in this regard. Because you have to present them with a concept before you publish. That used to be a rule on PlayStation. They would still say yes to almost everyone, but now you can literally just send things to certification. So it's totally different, and it's too easy to publish games. And PlayStation Store is not a free market. I want to repeat that. It is not a free market any more than you going into Walmart and telling them, why isn't every single cereal in the world on this shelf right now? Because it is not a free market. It is what Walmart wants to sell.
Right.
So it's that simple. So
you can't go in, like when there's physical copies of Lilymo games, you can't just go in and tell Walmart, like, well, you have to sell my game. You have to sell it. I made it. I have a right to sell it here. It's like, no, it's not. It's not how it works.
It's mean, but there is a real, thankfully, and I'm not just saying this to our audience to blow smoke up their asses, although maybe I am. I just don't see a lot of the same nonsense in our audience that I see like in some comments on YouTube or other things where it's like, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. You know, like when people say things sometimes, it's like, what are you even saying? Like, what are you talking about? You have no concept of what you're saying. It's the same thing with freedom of speech with Twitter. Like, there's no freedom of speech on Twitter. What are you talking about? They can make the rule that Twitter, you literally have to speak German and only speak about farming, and that would be perfectly legal on Twitter. So people need to get a grip on what these companies actually have to do. Hey, and speaking of Twitter, just as a quick aside, what do you think about all that? Are you going to sign up for Hive?
I signed up just to secure my name, but I've just been looking around there. It's got Reset Era vibes. You know, it feels like a NeoGAF Reset Era where it's like these, very different ideologies exclusively there. But I don't honestly know. In fact, the few times I've opened it up, it doesn't load right. So they clearly weren't ready, which makes sense. But follow me on Hive, everybody. I've not posted yet, and I probably never will. But do it anyway.
I'm not on Hive. Don't follow me there. I was saying on our Discord that. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. What?
There's something very important about Hive. A post from Chris Raygun. This is something we need to rally around, Colin. Yeah. This is what. See, look, it's not loading. Thanks, Hive. If I recall correctly, Chris said if he got a certain amount of followers on Hive. Let's see. We'll be posting 8K resolution images of my penis here when we reach 1 million followers. That's a promise. We could probably get him to 60K, but the world is going to need to do the rest.
Yeah, I am never going to sign up for Hive. I think it's hysterical that anyone thinks that this is going to be a thing. We often talk about how tech is inertial. The tech industry and the internet is inertial. What I mean by that is once something is moving forward, it's basically going to go forward unless something really disruptive comes in its way. And I want to ask anyone, anyone name a truly disruptive company from the last 10 years that interrupted something that had already existed? Amazon is still dominant. Walmart.com. I lived with someone that worked at Walmart.com in 2007, and they were trying all the way back then to make them to fight with Amazon. You know, it's like Netflix is still the dominant force in streaming with Disney kind of coming up, which is already an existing company. Twitter, Facebook, Google, Apple, what they used to call FANG when Facebook was still called Facebook, right? It was Alphabet, Apple, Netflix, Google, Meta. Like these are all, it's just the same company. So Twitter is the smallest by far of all of those companies, which is why it was picked off the way it was. And I don't understand why anyone thinks that there's going to be a replacement to this. And I say that as someone who would love to see Twitter fucking burn. Love it. Would love it. I don't give a shit. What I find interesting is the very people who can shut this thing down tomorrow won't stop using it. You want Twitter to die? Starve it. Not of revenue. Starve it of attention. That'll do the job quick. But it's the very people that want to complain about it that will never leave it. And I think it's so funny. People are so enslaved to these things. And I think I was one of those people until a couple of years ago. I really do. I have a Facebook account from 2004. It's active. I don't use it. I have a LinkedIn account, which I don't even think I know how to log into. I actually think until last year it said that I was still working at Kind of Funny. I finally figured out how to get into it and change that. So I don't know. I'm just not much of a social media person. No TikTok. Instagram I have, but I'm just not naturally inclined to it. I don't want to share visual aspects of my life. I don't know. It's just strange. It's just not for me. Anyway, Hive's not going to happen. It's funny that everyone thinks it is, though.
It's not.
Okay. You've been playing Warzone, as I recall. And Warzone 2.0, according to Activision, has reached, in its first 5 days, 25 million players. So that's huge. I mean, it goes to show you, we were talking about 5 million sold games. Warzone is free, but 5 million copies of God of War, a fifth of the attention Warzone garnered in the same time period. So it just goes to show you the difference in scale. What do you think of those numbers, and what do you think of the game? I guess, again, we'll continue to mix up the what we're playing with this.
So the launch few days were not so hot with Warzone 2. And I was thinking about it. It's one of those things where you expect games to work when they release, but especially with a free game like this, where you have 25 million players in 5 days, I feel like I'm willing to give them some slack for it being a little janky. You know, sometimes you get into a lobby, it doesn't quite put you in a game right. there's a little bit of maybe some jitteriness with players, some lag in some servers in the first few days, which for the most part has been resolved already very quickly. So I kind of good work actually, I would say to Infinity Ward and Activision on that, because that is a lot of players to account for all at once, and they have a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but I can still imagine that being a difficult task. But overall, man, I'm having a great time with Warzone 2. It's been taking up a ton of my mind, whether when I'm playing it or thinking about different loadouts and strategies and stuff like that when I'm not playing it. So it's been great. There's nothing. Well, I don't want to say there's nothing like it. There are definitely things like it when it comes to battle royale and stuff like that. But this one really speaks to me way more than the other ones do.
Right on. Glad you're enjoying it. Glad there are millions of you out there having fun with it right now. We'll continue to dive into it moving forward. I was curious what you thought of this story from Kotaku, where apparently, and their article by John Walker is entitled "Marvel's Avengers spokesperson removed after offensive tweets unearthed." And this comes originally from the PC website, the old PC website, Rock Paper Shotgun, which I don't hear very much of anymore, where they dug up a bunch of this guy's tweets. His name is Brian Wagner. He's the spokesperson and lead game designer on Marvel Avengers. And he was apparently removed from his post as spokesperson for the game, though at Crystal Dynamics, though he is still lead designer on the game, of course. And there are tweets from between 2010 and 2016 where he tweets some, I don't know, borderline stuff. I don't think any of it is really that bad from what I've seen. And some of it seems to be presented out of context. So Crystal Dynamics said that they were removing him as the spokesperson, and the guy himself sent out this tweet saying, "Over the weekend, old tweets I wrote from my time at Crystal resurfaced, and I apologize and take full accountability for the hurt they caused to my followers, the community, and those I work with. Since that time, I have learned and grown, and the content I posted doesn't reflect who I am today. I understand if you cannot accept my apology because of the pain I have caused, I will continue to listen, learn, and work to improve myself." Jeez Louise. What did you make of this story? You have anything to say?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Just because some of the things I feel like aren't really, they make sense that someone would say that at the time. There are words that are more offensive now than they were then.
He says no homo, I think, is one of the things he says, which
right.
is definitely a thing people used to say at IGN. So
yeah. The weird part to me is just that what is the range of accountability that people should expect? Like, you know what I mean? Was anyone really hurt by a tweet that was posted 10 years ago? They were laying in bed at night like, can't believe that the lead designer of Avengers called someone a homo on Twitter. And that was probably the lightest one, right? I'm not saying that everything he said was like excusable. I think there were some things that were like, yeah, that's kind of bad even for the time. But I don't know. The thing that I always try to think is that people do change. I don't feel like I'm the same person this year as I was last year, the year before, 10 years ago, whatever. But I don't know. It's tough because you also do want to hold people accountable to some extent, but obviously it can be taken way too far.
Yeah, I agree. And what's interesting is that he's not some newcomer. Lead game designer of Avengers means he has experience. And indeed, he worked at Marvel when these tweets were posted. So it's a little hypocritical, I think, to like get mad at him now, although maybe people didn't notice them. However, we always kick the shit out of Kotaku on this show. And I want to read from their article because I was stunned what I was reading on Kotaku. I have never read something like this on Kotaku in my life. It's by John Walker. I'm going to read it in part from the article about this. He says this, and it's long, but I want to get into this because I literally could not believe the source. "Look, you don't need my opinion," he says, "about any of this because you already have your own. And honestly, this just feels like a story we've written 300 times already, just with a different bloke's name at the start. But heck, even I still have opinions. What I hate about all this, every aspect of it, is that none of it is truthful on any side. Those scripted apologies are designed to save face, to cover all bases, and to draw a line under it without ever actually saying sorry to anyone for anything. It's empty, performative, only fooling those entrenched in the corporate thinking that writes them. This is why, by the way, when I had my falling out with Kind of Funny over a totally benign joke I told on Twitter, I refused to apologize because I'm like, I don't mean it. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to apologize and I don't mean it. So I might as well not apologize. He goes on to say, at the same time, Wagner's tweets weren't wantonly causing untold hurt to vast communities. They were shitty, bigoted comments that were ignored at the time, a single like on one, a lone retweet on another, and now reappear to be evidence to use in the online courts to possibly condemn him. People pretending they finally brought down this tyrannical menace from his campaign of hate are being ridiculously dishonest. And it's equally deceitful for Wagner to apologize as if that's what had happened. Crystal then throws it in too with nonsense about language and views that don't align with our studio values, as if any corporate entity itself is some sort of moral creature, possessing a pure, driven, platonic perfection of ideal values. Ever notice that? Every company is morally impeccable without needing to ever state how, instead allowing the individual to assume this means its values happily match their own. A person at the company causes outrage, at which point this nebulous immaculateness adapts to not be that, and everyone is asked to assume this aberration as the perfection has been erased. People say and do stupid stuff, he continues. People hold awful views or make nasty jokes. I know because I do. We all do. Even the most prurient. I don't know how to say this. I'm gonna look it up. Having or encouraging an excessive interest in sexual matters. Prurient. I don't know that word. I'm gonna go back. Even the most prurient presenting champions. So that means having or encouraging an excessive interest in sexual matters. Okay. Let me go back now. This is how I actually read when I do these things. Of wokeness have shitty thoughts, say stuff they regret, or hope that they say that the thing they said that one time stays private forever. Sometimes people surround themselves with so many others like them that they lose sight of how dreadful such things sound when said publicly on social media. Later, that comes back to bite them on the ass, and it should. I just wish people's responses were honest. And I agree with what he's saying here. It's like, it's unbelievable. And I couldn't believe that Kotaku actually wrote some of this. He goes on, let's not forget us, the brain gallery. He hasn't been fired. We have no damn clue if he deserves to be fired or if he's a champion for good these days. But more importantly, let's stop pretending we care if this person you've never heard of before today, who said some things a decade ago you didn't notice, gets to keep his job. What people want is for offensiveness to go away. And the idea that an ignorant public claiming this guy's head will somehow achieve this is damned idiotic. If he's a dick to work with, then Crystal should fire him. But let's be honest too, and stop acting like we know what's best in every situation. I couldn't believe that I read that on Kotaku. So I wanted to give that credit because that's not what I expected to write there. More of that would be nice. A little difference in opinion. One or two more things I want to get through. A couple trademarks filed in Japan. Gamatsu reports on these. I wanted to ask you, for one of these in particular, Square Enix filed a trademark for the Portopia serial murder case. Do you know what this game is, by chance?
No.
People should read
like The Quiet Man or something?
No, it's the Portopia serial murder case is a 1983 PC game, and it is widely considered the first visual novel. And it seems like this game will maybe be remade in some respect or re-released. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The other trademark from Square Enix is called Paranormasight. So maybe that also has something to do with Parasite Eve, which we were talking about the other week. And then there's a bunch of things from Koei Tecmo and Bandai Namco, Hook and Kaiju, Shigeru Planet. There's a bunch of things out of Koei Tecmo: Metaverse Musou, Metaverse Neo, Metaverse Suikoden. So, yeah, you got to check out this Portopia serial murder case game.
I'm looking at it right now on Wikipedia, and the thing that's jumping out at me is that the Famicom version sold 700,000 copies in Japan. So clearly there's probably tens of thousands of people that have fond memories of this game, and it's just completely absent over here. But that's very interesting. The cover art for it is just absolutely fantastic. I'm curious what an NES style visual novel is like.
There are playthroughs on YouTube if people are interested in checking it out. Also, it's worth noting, and this is just an interesting little tidbit, it's a Spike Chunsoft game, and it's one of their very first games. So a few things to check out. Not a huge surprise. It's like full circle, you know? Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Like here,
I'm looking. I found a Let's Play of it.
Yeah, are you looking at the fan English translation one?
Yes.
Yeah.
They have the smooth sprites on it, which I don't like, but it's at least a decent
This
video.
is cool, man. That'd be nice for them.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So I wanted to throw that out there. What else is there to get through really quick? Bless you.
Thank you. You could hear it through my mute.
This is boring. I don't want to talk about that anymore. The final thing we're going to talk about, because I just think it's hysterical. Fozzie Bear wrote in, said, "Hey, Thanksgiving buds, is Yuji Naka the video game legend who fell the most from grace? This man has gone from programming and producing Sonic games to directing the critically acclaimed Balan Wonderworld to now being arrested for allegedly insider trading. His lawyers got to go fast." So the story comes from Gamatsu. Thank you for writing in, by the way. And apparently Yuki Naka was arrested. So it's not even like he's being like just charged or whatever. He was under arrest. Yuji Naka, co-creator of Sonic the Hedgehog. And it's so shitty. It was just $10,000 or $20,000 apparently. Not that you should do it, but that's all he invested in the developer behind this Dragon Quest Tact game before it was announced. Seems fairly obvious he was insider trading. I guess we'll see how that goes. What do you think of this? Yuji Naka.
Yeah.
Who by the way, is suing Square Enix, so I don't know how that's going to go or how that plays into this as well. But yeah, what do you think?
Listen, Colin, this is an inside hit from Square Enix. Yuji Naka was talking a lot of shit. He's getting his lawyers involved.
He was.
Square Enix, they're one step ahead, and they planted this. Our boy, Balan Wonderworld, game of the generation, obviously, with its groundbreaking reverse draw distance technology. This is I'm telling you right now, Square Enix, they're bad people. This is our boy Yuji Naka should be free.
Free Yuji Naka. We should make free Yuji Yuji Naka stickers. I'm writing that down.
Free Yuji Naka.
And we can put like little slimes on it.
Yeah.
Oh, not slimes. That's I'm thinking Hori.
Balan on it.
Balan on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The little hat. I'm writing it down here. Okay. Very good. Okay. I think that's it for the smaller pieces of news. By the way, the if you care, The Witcher 3 was outlined on PS5. I mean, we already know it's coming out. We discussed it last week. If you care about all that, you can go check it out. I'm sick of talking about The Witcher. Okay. Anything else to talk about what we're playing? We've already talked about God of War. I mean, we can talk more about God of War. We can talk more about Warzone. I'm curious what you where you want to bring it.
Yeah. So just you'll hear some more thoughts on God of War and Warzone 2 from me in this week's Sacred Symbols Plus. God of War, we'll save it mostly for the spoiler cast, but I'm going to say I think that in a year where Elden Ring didn't exist, I think this would be my game of the year. But don't get me wrong, there's a wide gap between this game and Elden Ring, and we'll get into that later when we do our game of the year stuff. But overall, I think it was a fantastic game. I'm trying to decide how much I want to go back and clean up some of the different side quests, because all the side quests I did were really good, but I was terrified of getting the game spoiled for me, so I kind of probably about 40% in just started to mainline it. And then the only thing I'll just mention briefly is that shout out to our boy Gene Park. I've started Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And this was, a lot of him really, really saying this is one of the best games this year. It was nominated for the Game Awards. And I really didn't like what I played of the second one, but a lot of people tried to convince me that this one is better in a lot of ways and that I might like it anyway. And so far, it's interesting. I'm really not that far. I've been busy with my parents here. I had to pick them up from the airport yesterday, and I really haven't played very much of it. But what I can say is that it looks bad. Not as bad as Pokemon, but man, I really hope that new Switch is coming out next year. They need it at this point because it runs on a technical level. It is proficient, that it does seem to be mostly a solid 30 FPS. It's not like it feels like it plays bad, but it just when you've got a 65-inch TV that's 4K, it's just not cutting it on a lot of levels. So I'll report more on that when I get more time later.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm still playing God of War, still playing Tactics Ogre Reborn. Really nothing more to say about either of them. We'll obviously do a deep dive on God of War Ragnarok on Sacred Symbols Plus, so you can hear that. We'll probably go for about 2 hours there in the coming weeks, and we'll let you know when that's coming along on Patreon. So we'll leave that discussion for there. Come join us on Patreon. Okay. There are only 2 pieces of news this week, although other than what we talked about, although one of them is huge. In fact, before the show began, I printed it all out and I was telling Dustin I felt like I was back in college because I had 2 highlighters different color highlighters in my hand at the same time. which is reminding me of those old days of just reading and making notes and all of that. And so we have a lot to talk about in regards to Sony, Microsoft, and Activision. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk about what I think is the lead story this week, which is Sony's investment in Chinese software. And we will talk about that here. Number one, in an attempt to further differentiate itself from its stark competition on console, PC, and mobile alike, it appears Sony and its PlayStation brand is planning on doubling down on Chinese games for its platforms, a move confirmed in an article from Newswire Reuters. Sony, which has actually been fairly early to the Chinese market compared to its competitors, and which is selling PlayStation 5 briskly within the borders of its country, intends on increasing its investment into Chinese games, according to Reuters. As you may recall, Sony's forays into China have been called the China Hero Project, and this is a continuation of that. Indeed, fairly recent projects like 2.5D Metroidvania Fist, Forged in Shadow Torch, which came to PS4 and PS5 in 2021, are derived from this very same program, in which Sony identifies potentially successful products from Chinese teams, in this case TI Games, and helps incubate them, invest in them monetarily, and gives them other support. Other games include Anno Mutanium, I don't know how exactly to say that, and In Nightmare, which both came to PS4 and PS5 earlier this year, as well as next year's Evotinction, which we talked about a few months ago. Indeed, according to Reuters, 7 China Hero Project games from the first 2 investment cycles in 2017 and 2019 have made it to market, of 17 identified games, and games tagged in this third round will each receive $1 million yuan, or about $150,000 each, a small investment in Western games, but a much larger one in China's developing market. And what makes this new round of China Hero Project investments significant is that from the second wave, 2 games were so impressive to Sony that they are publishing those titles themselves, and a second-party capacity, a sign of confidence. The 2 games in question are Lost Soul Aside, which was first revealed 6 years ago and was an early China Hero Project game, as well as a game called Convaleria, which was first revealed 3 years ago. Website Gamatsu got hold of press releases for both games from Sony. I couldn't find these press releases. I don't know where they came from. And here's how they're described. Lost Soul Aside is being developed by a team called Utilizero, which is made up of 40 individuals. It's an action RPG that has also garnered investment from the likes of Epic. And while no release date or even target hardware has been revealed, its long dev cycle continues. It's PlayStation 5 bound sooner rather than later, and there's a new trailer out for it. As for Convaleria, this third-person shooter is by a team called Long Force with 2 O's. It's a PvP and PvE game, quote, that places teamwork and tactics at the heart of its gameplay, end quote. It's likely that this game, though also undated and without target hardware, is one of the vaunted dozen or so games as a service slated for PlayStation 5 in the coming few years. Sony's attention on China is serious. With a massive population of potential customers, it's an obvious market for any multinational corporation to breach. Reuters reports that since coming to Chinese markets in May of 2021, PlayStation 5 has surpassed 670,000 units sold, as well as 3.5 million PlayStation 4 consoles to date. Sony wants domestic Chinese attention to bolster its reach there, but it also covets Chinese games. Reuters cites Genshin Impact, one of the biggest Chinese games of all time, as a major boon for PlayStation, with Sony having cut Microsoft off and gaining access to the game itself. It makes some $4 billion a year.
Wow.
So what do you think? We're getting some new games out of China. There are trailers. I don't know if you watched them for Lost Soul Aside and Convaleria.
Yes.
I'm curious what you think of these 2 games.
Well, let me tell you, Lost Soul Aside, this game looks really good. It looks really, really promising. Beautiful graphics, really awesome, stylized action combat. Kind of reminded me of Devil May Cry in some ways. The third-person shooter game looks less interesting to me, but it doesn't look bad by any means. And this is cool, I think. I say that with some cautiousness, just because obviously we have a long tradition on this show about skepticism from Chinese companies, particularly Tencent being the biggest one. But I don't initially off the bat see any issues with investment in individual teams in China. This is clearly a very strong market with a lot of interesting developing teams as well, a lot of talent there. And it would be wise, I think, to look into that for different partnership opportunities. I think that there could be concerns down the road, depending on the popularity of these games, where we see specifically the film industry just bend over regularly to China for different things. And we wouldn't want that situation happening here. So these games look cool. I'm okay with what's happening right now, but I think this is something we definitely need to keep an eye on, as could be a potential problem, depending on how much government censorship and other factors come into play.
Yeah, actually, a few people wrote in about this. So let's go to Peter Long. He says, "Hey, CDC, Sony is continuing its seeding of the industry. This time it's turning its gaze to China. It's investing into small and large teams in the Chinese space and is also acting as the publisher for Lost Souls Aside. And Jim Ryan has stated that Sony plans to sell twice as many PS5s as PS4s in the Chinese market. I have worries that making partnerships with China could have negative effects for the brand going forward. More censorship, investment from shady Chinese companies, etc. Some of the things that Dustin touched on. I think, in my opinion, we have to kind of separate two things. I told you that we had to edit Super Perils of Baking on PS4 and PS5 to remove reference to Taiwan and China in it. Why would those things be referenced? It was just in a cookbook bestiary entry for our game. And we had to remove it, which we didn't have to do on Microsoft Xbox. We didn't have to do it on Steam's PC client. We didn't have to do it even on Nintendo. And so those things are already happening, and I can kind of see, remember, we talked about this preemptive Arc System Works edit to Guilty Gear Strive, where they removed Taiwan from the game's lore and did all these kinds of things, which definitely speaks to a growing geopolitical and social influence over video games and the manufacture of game machines, and certainly the manufacture and creation of software. But I feel like you have to separate that and all the implications of hardware manufacture at Foxconn, and just how, that fucking suicide nets and all that crazy shit that's going on over there. If people haven't seen it, it's true. Like Foxconn, which is the major Chinese purveyor of technologies amongst these other companies, there's pictures of literal like suicide nets so people can't kill themselves by jumping off of buildings and stuff. That's definitely something that people should think about, and why I've long said that it would be awesome to get domestically or fair made PlayStation 5s manufactured, even if they cost more. In other words, give people the option. Say, if you want an American PS5, it's $700, but at least you know that some fucking slave didn't make it. Okay, fair enough. That's its own stuff. But China is a country, an ancient country of over 1 billion people with a deep heritage and a deep history, one of the deepest, most complex histories dating back time immemorial, basically. And we need more of them in the creative arts, because there's lots to do there. It's strange to me that we haven't gotten more Chinese games. And I actually think I want to applaud Sony for going there, because I don't like the idea of punishing the game devs for the statism of where they're from that they probably don't agree with, and certainly could not say that they disagree with publicly. And I'm interested to see what they come up with. Regardless of all of the political weight, I just feel like it's different. These are our people. They're just trapped behind that iron curtain. I'm sure a lot of them don't want to be there. I'm sure a lot of them would move or be somewhere else if they could and make different money or work at other studios, but that is where they are. And I think it's cool that Sony is going towards them. And I think it's an aggressive play based, again, as I said, on Genshin Impact's just insane success, which Sony sealed off. It's on Switch now, but it's not on Xbox. And when you're making billions of dollars and you're getting 30% of that, that's not too bad. So what do you think of that? Do you think that we should kind of separate out the hardware from the software and kind of the different obligations we might have in thinking about those different structures?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've talked about on the show. We've tried to make very clear is that our issues are with the communist government of China and their censorship. It's not with the people or the cultural aspects. And you're absolutely right, is that there is such an interesting history to China and the people, and there's a lot of stories that can be told. And it is interesting seeing like what's the monkey, it's not Wo Long. There's another one too that's like a Dark Souls game that's like supposed to be Journey to the West.
Let me see.
That
Chinese Dark Souls game, Journey to the West.
Yeah, Chinese.
Black Myth.
Black Myth, Wukong.
Right.
That's it, right? Yeah. Yep. That looks excellent. That looks so incredibly cool. So, like I said, the concern, and I'm glad that Peter Long brought it up also, is just that there is definitely a concern about how it could affect the more entrenched they get into things. Like I'm specifically thinking about how in films we definitely see film censorship based on the Chinese market. There's been like a lot of amazing comedians that made jokes about how like they'll like add in like the gay kissing scene or whatever. They'll keep that and they'll make it a big thing for Pride Month in the US. And it's like, oh, we already had the clip ready because that's what we cut out of the Chinese version, right? Like, so there's definitely concerns about that for sure. Or like Star Wars, where they took Finn out, like they made Finn real small on the movie poster in China and stuff like that. It's like definitely not okay to have that either. So like I said, it's a monitoring situation that, yes, we want this to happen, but do it the right way. Don't fall prey to the influence of censorship.
Yeah, I just think I'm interested in what creations can come out of there, and why would they necessarily be tethered to their political opinions or how they feel and whatever. I just don't think we see enough out of them. And though there are many places around the world that don't share our outlook on things. I mean, I think about games coming from places like Eastern Europe, which are deeply homophobic, traditionalist, Catholic, and Orthodox places. I'm not saying they don't have the right to their cultures, but it's just an example. Like a game coming from CD Projekt, Poland is a much more socially conservative place. So people freak out that you can't get an abortion at 20 months or 20 weeks rather in Poland. Not that I don't care one way or the other. What I'm saying is we don't care. Right. So at some point, I think that it is that. And it was what I was saying too with that game Atomic Heart, made by Russians. But how far is that's a Russian team straight up. So how far are you going to take it? Right. They're obviously aggressively attacking another country right now. I'm sure there's nothing. I'm sure they haven't said anything about it. They don't want to be disappeared. So, or their family. So I just think we have to be more deliberate in separating things when we can. And I think the urgency with China and PlayStation is to get PlayStation 5's manufacturing out of China. That I think would be a bigger deal. As long as they're making machines there, who cares about the games? I mean, that's like the least of our concerns. In fact, it's probably a good thing. So we'll see how that all goes. But to this point, Dark Rod 99 wrote in and said, "Hey, Sacred Boys, with the China Hero project at full force, do you think Sony will expand the project to different countries like Latin America, India, and South Africa? I must say it is smart for them to do this since you will secure exclusive content for the console at a low price given currency in other countries that's not strong. What do you think?" I think you're totally right. And it's not the first time. This is not the first time Sony has lent money to people. Of course, we talk a lot about the pub fund from the PS3 and Vita era and into the PS4 era. That's where games like Guacamelee came from and Axiom Verge. And so Sony has been investing in random games for a long time, but I would love to see them penetrate these other markets because I do agree, unfortunately, for those markets that the money just goes further there. If you can find a game in Chile, you can find a game in Brazil, you can find a game in South Africa, Turkey. I don't know. That would seem like a smart move. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. And we've seen Sony do this, invest where there's talent. I think that makes tons of sense. I mean, it's not just the aspect of finding a game for cheap. Obviously, that's something that they're interested in, but it's also about, I mean, the possibility of potential future partners. They've gotten in with MiHoYo, the creators of Genshin Impact, and that is probably extremely valuable now going forward with what other stuff they want to create. So it seems like a low risk situation, not only to invest in places, but potentially invest in specific games, but also for the future stuff that those studios could create.
Yeah, right on. Before we move on, I wanted to just go back. Do we have anything else to say about these games themselves? I know we discussed a little bit about it, but I think they both look pretty cool. In fact, Convaleria, I think, looks pretty good. Looks like my kind of game. But I'm wondering if you have anything else that you want to add about these games. Lost Soul aside from Utila Zero, I think is what the studio's name is, Alta Zero maybe, and then Convaleria from Long Force.
Yeah, I recommend highly checking out. There's a trailer posted very recently of Lost Soul aside. And this game, it's the character that you see at the beginning, it looks very Final Fantasy-esque in a lot of ways. But then when you see what goes on, it almost like kind of in a small way reminds me of Control. some of the different sections in Control where you're I'm trying to remember exactly when you're in the oldest house and you're like acquiring new abilities and stuff like that. It's definitely it has its own unique style while kind of falling into like traditional Japanese anime look. So that's the thing, is I'd love to see them differentiate themselves as far as like what does a Chinese developed game looks like. Obviously it's going to have an Asian, Japanese, South Korean type look to it, but they have the opportunity to kind of create their own style as well.
Hey, it's me. I'm cutting in here because after we recorded today's extensive episode, something interesting happened regarding Microsoft, Activision, and Sony, which we are going to talk about in depth after this. However, I felt like this episode would be incomplete without this information. Dustin couldn't join me for this particular part of the episode because he's out fixing his oven for Thanksgiving. Important stuff. And I don't mean that sarcastically. It is important. He's got family over and stuff. So I thought I would share this with you to give you a little bit of a foundation, which we did not know about when we were talking about what you will hear next. And this comes from Politico, which is interesting. Politico is a site I read almost every day, but it's a political website, an American political website. Actually, it's German owners, I think, now. But I read it every day for your nerdy American political fare. But they have an exclusive. And this was written by Josh Cisco over there and published just moments ago from when I'm recording this, although you'll see it the next day. It's entitled Feds Likely to Challenge Microsoft's $69 billion Activision Takeover. And their report is the following, quote, the Federal Trade Commission is likely to file an antitrust lawsuit to block Microsoft's $69 billion takeover of video game giant Activision Blizzard, maker of the hit games Call of Duty and Candy Crush, according to 3 people with knowledge of the matter. A lawsuit would be the FTC's biggest move yet under Chair Lina Khan to rein in the power of the world's largest technology companies. It would also be a major black mark for Microsoft, which has positioned itself as a white knight of sorts on antitrust issues in the tech sector, after going through its own grueling regulatory antitrust battles around the world more than 2 decades ago. Excuse me. A lawsuit challenging the deal is not guaranteed, and the FTC's 4 commissioners have yet to vote on out a complaint or meet with lawyers for the companies, 2 of the people said. However, the FTC staff reviewing the deal are skeptical of the company's arguments, those people said. The investigation remains ongoing, but much of the heavy lifting is completed, including depositions of Microsoft's chief executive Satya Nadella and Activision head Bobby Kotick. The people with knowledge of the investigation said, if the agency does move ahead with a case, it can come as soon as next month, said the people, all of whom were granted anonymity to discuss a confidential matter. Central to the FTC's concern is whether acquiring Activision will give Microsoft an unfair boost in the video game market. Microsoft's Xbox is number 3 to an industry-leading Sony Interactive Entertainment and its PlayStation console. Sony, however, has emerged as the deal's primary opponent, telling the FTC and regulators in other countries that if Microsoft made hit games like Call of Duty exclusive to its platform, Sony would be significantly disadvantaged. And they note that the FTC declined to comment. Now, the FTC, of course, is the Federal Trade Commission here in the United States. It's actually a government body, but it is independent, much like some other bodies of the government where it doesn't work for any specific administration or any specific branch of government. And its entire charge is to deal with antitrust law and issues related to consumerism. So this is a big deal. FTC is the biggest body of its kind in the world because our market is the biggest market in the world for these kinds of things. And the Politico article also notes that the UK's Competition and Markets Authority published their stuff recently. Now, the CMA, as it is called in the UK, will be what is mostly referenced moving forward on this podcast because we've already gone through that report, and that's what the rest of this episode is about. However, after that, this is where all this stuff happened. There's an interesting piece, though, in here that I wanted to add. It's actually buried in the article a little bit. It says, quote, to a lesser extent, Google is also an opponent of the deal, according to 2 of the people with knowledge of the matter. The company has argued that Microsoft has purposely degraded the quality of its Game Pass subscription service when used with Google's Chrome operating system, and owning Activision would further its incentive to do so, ultimately steering hardware sales towards Microsoft and away from Google, the people said. So Google, a much bigger company than Sony, has problems of its own with this deal because they think that they're being basically throttled and abused on their Chrome browser, which I'm using right now, although I'm recording this on Brave for some reason because Brave works with Zencaster very well. So that's basically everything. It seems like no sides answered any pleas for comment. And that's basically how we leave it now. So I just wanted to update you guys with that. Again, if you want to read the story, which I'm sure will be reported everywhere by the time you hear this, it's on Politico, politico.com. Feds likely to challenge Microsoft's $69 billion Activision takeover. It looks like an FTC lawsuit is incoming. What we talk about a lot of this stuff later on about the possibilities of this deal not happening. It's worth noting at the top, though, again, and you'll hear about this later, there's a $3 billion fee that Microsoft must pay Activision if the deal doesn't go through for any reason. That is the cost of developing 10 Call of Duty games. And so that's an enormous amount of money. And Microsoft has a big reason to want to get this deal through. But I got to be honest with you, with the CMA suing it, the European Commission looking at this thing skeptically, and now the FTC, I don't think so. I don't think this thing looks like it's going to be happening, at least very easily. We'll see if the lawsuit is filed as soon as next month. Go check out the Politico story and listen to the rest of the podcast and our analysis of what we've known so far up to this point. Okay. The other piece of news this week, as I said, there's only one other big piece of news, has to do with Microsoft and Sony and Activision and Call of Duty, a well-worn topic that every week I keep saying I'm sick of talking about it, but it keeps coming up in ways that make it relevant that we couldn't really, in good conscience, ignore. So I wrote this up yesterday, but then more things came out. So, excuse me, I'm going to read what I wrote yesterday, and then we're going to go much deeper into what I have since then, okay? So let's begin here. Number 2. Though we are tired of talking about it, an admittedly spicy article in the New York Times has given us even further insight into the Activision, Microsoft, Sony saga that now seems to be stretching into its 50th year, but which has in fact been about a year in the making. We don't need to remind you at this point that Microsoft is poised to spend nearly $70 billion to secure Activision Blizzard King, the mega publisher known best for Call of Duty and Candy Crush. That investment will net Microsoft all of its IP, studios, and more, but it will also bring with it all of the cost and overhead of running these entities, which is why Microsoft has been fairly candid in admitting that it's not removing, say, Call of Duty from PlayStation platforms once this deal goes through. Yet the very prospect of this deal has given Sony enough pause that it has heavily invested itself in fighting it tooth and nail, and while it has failed around the world, it has gained traction in Europe, where the deal is being held up. The New York Times piece opens starkly, quote, "In recent weeks, Microsoft has accused Sony, its chief video game rival, of misleading regulators," end quote. As the article continues, Microsoft must gain the approval of 16 of the world's largest governments for the deal to happen, and while it has been smooth sailing in some places like Brazil, the European Commission has been far less kind, and even the Federal Trade Commission here in the US hasn't stamped its approval yet. The article later continues, quote, "At the heart of regulators' concerns about the Activision deal is whether it violates antitrust laws by giving Microsoft outsized power in the video game industry. They worry that Microsoft could pull Activision's games away from the competitors like Sony or use them to get an unfair leg up as more gaming is streamed online," end quote. The deal is expected to be held up until at least next year, with no chance of it going through before year's end. And Microsoft's bullishness in getting the deal done may come back to bite them. As the newspaper notes, there's a $3 billion kill clause if Microsoft doesn't follow through for any reason, meaning that Microsoft would have to pay Activision $3 billion in cash. Okay. Both Microsoft and Sony are said to have employed lobbying firms and representatives to push their individual sides to various bodies in the respective countries they must get the approval from, and more on that in a minute. Xbox head Phil Spencer said in part that Sony has, quote, "overstated the importance of Call of Duty to its viability," end quote, and reiterated yet again that, quote, "maintaining and growing the existing Call of Duty business is pretty central to the economics of the deal," end quote, as noted a million times on the show. PlayStation head Jim Ryan said in part that Microsoft is, quote, "a tech giant with a long history of dominating industries. It is highly likely that the choices gamers have today will disappear if this deal goes ahead," end quote. Microsoft's most recent offer, a 10-year deal beyond the parameters of the current deal that Sony has with Activision through 2024, would theoretically keep Call of Duty on PlayStation until at least 2034. This is apparently still insufficient for Sony, and thus the two sides continue to battle. So that's part one, before we get into anything else. So anything to say there before we move on?
It's just continues to evolve. The 10-year deal thing was really interesting, especially small spoiler and tease for Sacred League. But this is something that we guessed on that's available for our patrons, the $1 level at this point, if you want to take a listen. But we had said that there would be no further deal signed. But here it is, a 10-year deal.
Well, it wasn't signed, so we're right.
Well, yeah, it wasn't signed, but that's true. I didn't even think about that. Okay. That'll be an interesting topic for next month. But yeah, this document, Colin, I feel like this is where the real meat is. And I'm very curious about the stuff you highlighted. I wasn't able to look through it quite as thoroughly as you, but it definitely made me think about some things in a different way. We've been talking on the show this whole time about how there would be enough time for Sony to build a competitor to Call of Duty. And one of the things in this document that they bring up is like EA has been trying to do this over and over with Battlefield and has never been able to successfully do it, which is kind of an interesting point. But also I feel like Battlefield continues to be an inferior product in a lot of ways. So it's almost like, well, yeah, but is that on them in a lot of ways? And it's interesting too that there's a part where they talk about how Microsoft, this is what they do. They come in and they buy things up, and then they dominate the industry because of it. And this one is probably the time that the biggest example of them trying to do that. And so it was interesting because they bring up the quote, they bring up the Bethesda deal, where talking about how Phil Spencer kind of just says what he needs to in the moment. I found that really interesting. And maybe that's, I don't know. Some people would say it's not a good thing that I said a Sony talking point before they did, but it was an exact point that I made on the show.
Yeah, I don't think it just goes to show how canny we are sometimes on the show, not for nothing. But here is what we're talking about. It's this document. I printed it out today. It's called Sony Interactive Entertainment Observations of the CMA's Issue Statement. And this was created by the law firm Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton, which I guess is representing Sony in this regard in the UK specifically. This has to do with, and I went through it like I was saying. I felt like I was back in college, just highlighting things that I wanted to go over. The reality is that there is a shit ton of really interesting things in here, some of which have to do with the Activision Blizzard deal, some of which don't, but are just interesting nonetheless. And I thought we would just go through it. We're not going to get to everything because this is extensive. However, it's 22 pages, I think. 3 of them are redacted, so I think it's like 16 or 17 pages of text. Like I said with the Mick Gordon piece about Doom Eternal, you got to go read this. If you care about video games and are interested in the behind the scenes, I mean, it literally doesn't get much better than this in terms of what they actually say. So here, I want to go into it, and we'll just go into what I feel is important. We'll go piece by piece and through the important pieces. So, in part, and you can, well, I guess if you're not watching the video, it's not useful, but there's an executive summary. And the third part of the executive summary at the beginning says this: SIE, which is Sony, agrees with the decision's findings. It believes strongly that the transaction, the deal, will harm competition, industry participants, innovation, and consumers. In summary, the transaction is a game changer that poses a threat to an industry enjoyed by hundreds of millions of consumers. Activision's content, in particular, its blockbuster franchise Call of Duty, one of the most successful franchises of all time, that for 20 years has been consistently, quote, the largest annualized AAA premium franchise in the games market, end quote, in their citations, is irreplaceable for gaming platforms. As the decision found, it is, quote, especially important for attracting gamers to the platform, end quote, and its importance, quote, cannot be captured by market share alone, end quote. And that was from the actual decision that the CMA made already. The transaction will put this content under Microsoft's sole control, giving it an unprecedented content advantage at a point where the industry is at a critical inflection point in its evolution. All right, so let's stop there. What do you make of this? The idea that this is and again, they bold this. The transaction is a game changer that poses a threat to an industry enjoyed by hundreds of millions of consumers. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think that it is interesting. They bring up the point about it being the most successful franchise of all time for 20 years. That's no joke. And that's kind of what I was bringing up earlier about Battlefield, is that surely when you have something this successful, there are going to be many people trying to capture some of that success. We really haven't seen anyone do that in any significant way. So I kind of do see their point on this. Obviously, we want competition. We don't want there to just be one de facto realistic FPS shooter, but I can understand what they're saying here.
All right, next. Post-transaction, Microsoft would have the ability and incentive to exclude or restrict rivals, including PlayStation and PlayStation Plus, from having access to Call of Duty. The decision identifies 5 recent Microsoft acquisitions of game studios where shortly after the acquisition in question, Microsoft changed the business model of the acquired studio and then withdrew new titles from competing platforms. As the CMA found, Microsoft, quote unquote, has a pattern of acquiring developing studios and making their upcoming games exclusive to Xbox. Given the significance of Activision's titles, Microsoft would have an even stronger incentive, in quotes, to make them exclusive to Xbox and Game Pass post-transaction. In fact, Microsoft does not contest that it intends making Activision content exclusive to Game Pass and denying PlayStation Plus access to that content. So what do you think of this? Now, Sony, I haven't seen them bring this up yet, but that they're bringing PlayStation Plus into this. This idea that we wouldn't even be able to have our competing service have Call of Duty, even if we were willing to pay for it. What do you think of this idea?
I think that this one I definitely don't agree with as much. It's true. They do have the ability, but I will have to side with Phil Spencer. And what you've said as a theory and it's not even really a theory, is that
It's not a theory, dude, anymore. I mean, they're saying
it's not a theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's saying it. That they need to sell Call of Duty to make it worthwhile. Because, and especially just thinking about the recent sales of the game, they would be stupid to not sell it to PlayStation as a platform. That's part of the business model, and sure, it could be a huge boost to Game Pass. And it would require Sony to work a little harder as far as the fact that it would be making Game Pass a more appealing platform in Xbox, because you could just buy into that system and get it for free. But I think there would still be plenty of players on PlayStation that would be willing to buy it.
So, first of all, you're right. And just to reiterate what I had written earlier that I had said before we got into this whole document, this is what Phil Spencer, again, says about Call of Duty. Maintaining and growing the existing Call of Duty business is pretty central to the economics of the deal. It can't be any clearer. That part of it I'm so sick of. He's basically saying, and this is what makes it so frustrating, although I understand Sony's position, and why wouldn't they fight it? They're winning at this point, I think. So they're probably like, this is working. I mean, we're just needling the shit out of these guys and wasting their time. And at the very least, we can do that. But he's saying that they can't maintain the economics of the deal without PlayStation. He's saying it. So it's no longer, again, I mean, you've said it 17 different times now, but it's crazy that people are still floating that. That's like, you're wrong. And that's what I was saying earlier in the show, where I just wonder where some people's analysis come from. A lot of people don't know what they're talking about. If they thought that this deal was going to be able to be maintained by putting the game on Game Pass, and that was it. Are you crazy? So that's why I feel like Sony rings a little hollow, in my opinion, in this regard. But I thought it was interesting that they brought up PlayStation Plus, because I never really considered the idea of PlayStation Plus growing more and more in these different tiers, and the possibility it's like, well, okay, well, what if we want Call of Duty on PlayStation Plus? And what they're saying is that, in fact, and it says, quote, in fact, Microsoft does not contest that it intends making Activision content exclusive to Game Pass and denying PlayStation Plus access to that content. So that's just another angle, and I thought that was interesting. They had never really brought that up before, as far as I'm concerned. And they bring up 5 different studios that Microsoft messed around with, and we're going to get into those because they get into those more deeply. Although if you are a fan of games, maybe you can start using your head to figure out what 5 studios they might be talking about. Okay. So here's what they say in continuation. The transactions effects in console and multi-game subscription services would cause significant harm to consumers, competition, and developers. So they don't say themselves, which I think is interesting. Consumers would be harmed. In the short term, PlayStation users would no longer have access to Call of Duty or would be forced to spend £450 on an equivalent Xbox to play this hugely popular game on their less preferred device. In the midterm, a significant number of PlayStation users would likely switch to Xbox and/or Game Pass. Faced with weaker competition, Microsoft would be able to increase console and game prices for Xbox users, increase the price of Game Pass, and reduce innovation and quality. These harms would be amplified by the direct and indirect network effects at play in the industry, allowing Microsoft to further raise prices or reduce quality once its position has become even more entrenched. This is really bad. And I was thinking about this, that this is so off that this must have been someone missed this, because they literally wrote this. This was being written in September and October, dated October 28th. And they just raised the price of their own console. So it just doesn't, I understand that that's just the economic reality, but that doesn't make sense. You just did that to your own ecosystem without Call of Duty exclusivity. So why does that matter? I feel like that's a miss. Do you agree?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Competition would be harmed, they say. PlayStation's and Xbox's incentives to invest in innovation and quality improvements depend on the number of customers that competition can attract. Microsoft's foreclosure strategy would lock in many consumers to Xbox, including existing Xbox users who play Call of Duty and those switching from PlayStation to play Call of Duty. Those locked-in users would become less likely to switch in response to any pro-competitive actions on Sony's part. This would effectively prevent Sony from competing for the business of a large portion of console gamers, reducing its incentives to invest. In this way, as the decision found, Microsoft's strategy would, quote, materially affect Sony's ability to compete, end quote. This also doesn't make any sense to me, but I feel like I've said this before, but Sony's urgency in this indicates that they have data that is really troubling. Either that or they really are just trying to needle and waste Microsoft's time. What do you think about competition being harmed if this happened?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. I'm trying to read here. So they're saying, Microsoft foreclosure strategy would lock in many consumers to Xbox. Okay, so they're saying about people being locked into Xbox and not wanting to switch over to PlayStation.
Well, I think they're referring probably tangentially to PS4 and Xbox One, where Sony courted a shit ton of Xbox players that generation just by having a better machine.
Right. And this is kind of, it's so funny because this is like totally Sony's playbook. Like, oh, we want everyone to stay locked in on PlayStation 4 by not allowing crossplay. Or certain games, the crossplay only works between PC and PS4, which I'm trying to remember. I know that was the case for one game. So this is totally what Sony does all the time, is try to lock people into the PlayStation ecosystem. So again, it rings a bit hollow.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And then independent developers would be harmed. This one's strange too. Independent developers today have two principal options: PlayStation and PlayStation Plus, and Xbox and Game Pass. By making Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox and Game Pass, the transaction would tip demand for multi-game subscription services towards Xbox and Game Pass. As Microsoft foreclosed PlayStation and PlayStation Plus, it would likely become a critical distribution channel for independent developers. In that weakened negotiating position, independent developers would likely receive worse terms for their content from Microsoft, or even be required to promise exclusivity in return for distribution, thereby diminishing independent developers' ability to an incentive to invest in high-quality new games. This, in turn, would also harm consumers even further. This is really weird to me because Sony does this, or at least did this for a really long time. They get timed exclusivity and terms of distribution for money. That's what they do. That's what happened with Final Fantasy 16. That's what happened with small games like Stray. You get a little money is exchanged to kind of help you not sell it somewhere else. You get the exclusive boon of knowing that Stray, for instance, will always be associated with PlayStation even after it comes out. And Sony has been doing this for a long time. As I've said on this show, Sony could have had Limbo during the PSN era, but wanted it exclusively, and they said no. So it's just strange to me. They're describing themselves. It's like Sony describing themselves in a mirror. Yeah. This is just, that's just the way it is. That doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that it's funny that both of those points are exactly that.
All right, here's where punches start to get thrown. Number 4, Microsoft's response to the decision claims that the CMA's case rests on self-serving statements by SIE. SIE statements are not self-serving, the piece reads. They reflect genuine and evidence concerns about a tech titan, which they make a proper noun, buying up irreplaceable content at incontestable prices to tip competition to itself. The decision does not rest only on statements made by SIE, but rather on a wide body of evidence from other third parties, internal documents, business data, economics analysis, and Microsoft's own conduct that explains Microsoft's strategy and the anti-competitive effects that the transaction would have. To take one example, the decision identifies multiple Microsoft documents, highlighting its incentives to foreclose rivals. This is where I think that Sony's right. Microsoft has it's unclear if Activision's actual value on the market is $68.7 billion. What we know is that no one in the games industry can possibly rival that ask. And that is part of the market. That's the way it goes. When Codemasters was up for sale and Take-Two bid $800 million, EA came in and said, we'll pay you $1.2 billion. And that was the end of that. So, I mean, that's the way it happens. So we're not talking about $800 million. We're not talking about $1.2 billion. We're not even talking about $3 billion like with Bungie. We're talking about $68.7 billion. And so I actually think Sony is right here that Microsoft does have a history of just, and you had said it earlier, of putting itself into places and then elbowing everyone else out. And that's about what I was saying earlier about this principle I have in economics of just the inertial nature of tech businesses. It's like what we say about Meta. Meta is so big that they lose billions of dollars on the metaverse a quarter and are still just hanging out, not going anywhere. Right. So what do you think about this idea of the self-serving statements by SIE are not true and that they are, quote, reflect genuine and evidence concerns about a tech titan buying up irreplaceable content at incontestable prices?
Yeah, and I think that the effects, we already saw this somewhat with Bethesda, but I think it's worth mentioning too that like buying something at that high a price that is, impossible by anyone else and potentially raising the prices for all game studios so that there's definitely like the overvalue. It makes Sony, it's difficult for not just Sony, but other developers as well to start buying studios whereas Microsoft can do that without any issue. They can spend $68.7 billion. But yeah, I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit, but the legal aspects, but it's definitely a lot of money.
Okay.
It's a lot of legalese for me. This is a little out of my wheelhouse, but
yeah, really challenging yourself here. Let's keep going.
I know. Yeah. I'm ready. I'm ready for more.
Number 5. Instead of engaging with the decision's careful and thorough assessment, Microsoft's core argument is that the transaction cannot harm competition because PlayStation is currently more popular than Xbox. This contention is misconceived. First, the circumstance that in the recent console generation, Microsoft is somewhat behind SIE, and they say somewhat behind,
somewhat,
does not mean that the transaction cannot harm competition. Foreclosure of an important competitor still constitutes anti-competitive conduct and, in the present case, would have anti-competitive effects. To the extent that SIE has achieved, and I think this is important, to the extent that SIE has achieved a lead, this has been driven by its investments in the quality of its platform and competition on the merits. A foreclosure strategy that significantly restricted SIE's ability to compete would not result in a level playing field and would have been achieved only by harming competition and consumers. I actually think this is probably true. It's actually evidenced by the transaction's existence. Microsoft has to do something like this because they can't make the games themselves. I mean, that's obvious, right? And some of them are coming out, but they don't have enough. They don't have, I don't think, the quality, the talent level, the cadence right now. And so they need this outside help. And it is, and I know people bust balls, Sony's acquisitions traditionally, until recently, have all been of the organic nature. It is true. You can't name a single developer Sony had purchased before the PS5 era in which they didn't work with them extensively before they purchased them. From Sucker Punch to Insomniac to whatever. And even studios that were closed down like Zipper and Cambridge and others. So I actually think that this is maybe a valuable course of inquiry for Sony to say, listen, and again, quote, to the extent that SIE has achieved a lead, this has been driven by its investments in the quality of its platform and competition on the merits, end quote. I think that is a powerful argument because when people bring up, well, what about Final Fantasy 16? It's like, well, let's look at the numbers. Okay. Again, this is important. Call of Duty Warzone 2.0, 25 million in 5 days. God of War, which is going to be way bigger than Final Fantasy 16, 5 million players in a week. Mm-hmm. So I just think it is relevant to say Call of Duty is different. And even though we make these sorts of exclusive deals, which make us look, and I admit, make them look a little bit hypocritical in regards to how things are playing out, we're not buying the cow. And we haven't done anything that has really stripped Xbox of any content because the players we deal with us first. So when we bought Bluepoint, when we bought Housemarque, I mean, the only outside really strange ones were like Nix's and maybe Fire Sprite or something like that, even though they also have a history with PlayStation. So I just think there is something here. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that like even the Nix's one, while it's not as traditional as the ones before, it has a very specific intent. Sony wants to reach further into the PC market. It makes sense to buy a team that does that specifically. So, and it's interesting too, the SIE has achieved a lead that is driven by its investments in its quality of its platform. And that's kind of the interesting part too about all of the Microsoft investments. You're talking about how they've needed to purchase teams in order to make stuff happen, which is just funny just because they already had quite a few teams that just seemingly weren't putting out the same quality as PlayStation. A few months ago, actually, this might have been more than a few months ago at this point, there was that internal Xbox document about how, was it about The Last of Us? They were saying like they've made something that we are incapable of making currently.
Yeah, I think they basically reiterate something like that because the PlayStation sites are writing about that today, that Microsoft basically admits that Sony's games are better. And They basically say that again. Which I think is it's so strange watching these companies defend themselves and make themselves look stupid in the process. And I really think they just don't care because most people aren't paying attention, and this has huge ramifications for their audiences and their abilities to make money. But I think Sony is right, generally speaking, in this regard. They invested in their own studios and their own games. The biggest games on PlayStation, other than Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, are their own games. Right. It's not even close, right? And they can't go to anyone else and say like, well, we got someone influenced Uncharted and we got Infamous from this and Kills. And it's like, no, those are ours. And so it is true. And you can go back to Microsoft bought Halo. Let's not forget. So this goes all the way back to the beginning. That is true. And they've botched even that game over time. So I think Sony does have a way to say like, listen, we've done it the right way in quotes, and it has worked and we've become powerful because of the quality. And it sucks that you're going to let a competitor come in and just wash that all away because they have money and scale, which we do not have. And I think that's a valuable course of inquiry for Sony. So I must agree with them there. All right, I'm moving ahead a little bit. They talk about cloud gaming and all this shit I don't care about. They eventually say this, quote, and this comes from the Sony reiterates this. This actually comes from the original CMA report. Microsoft has shown itself willing to make losses in the short term in order to build scale and increase its user base. So what do you think of that argument? Sony can't do that. This is obviously the Netflix style. And when Sony tried to do this, it was when they were hurting the most, which was during the PS3 era. And I've talked about this with Sandeep on our show, when the irony of that is, every PS3 that was sold, Sony did worse because they were losing more and more money. And so they're saying here that they can't compete where people are willing to make huge losses to have long-term gain.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this comes back to another major talking point on our show is about the profitability of Game Pass. And I understand that with a lot of platforms like this and services, that's kind of how it works, is that you have to burn money for a really long time in hopes that eventually you will squeak out a profit. Almost like so some really interesting stuff about that service, Movie Pass, from a few years ago, where they were really trying to hard, where if they could reach a certain user level of people that paid in that didn't use it as much as the people that used it all the time, then eventually they'd be able to reach profitability, but they were never able to quite reach it. And so I think that's kind of probably was the case for Game Pass for a lot of years, that they were burning money, in which we've had conversations about the recent comments that Phil has made about Game Pass is being profitable. It's like, okay, but in how exactly, right? Like you were kind of more skeptical about that. I think we only touched on it briefly on the show about that aspect, the profitability. Yeah,
I am. So like you said, Phil had come out and basically said, and it's profitable. I don't believe you. I mean, that's what I said. It's like, I don't believe you straight up, because I don't think here's what I think is true. If you take literal money in from Game Pass and then money out to secure second or really third party games only, I was going to say second and third party, but really only third party games, I bet you they're profitable. I bet you more money comes in than they spend to secure licenses on games. That's not the equation. The equation is, how much money are you not making by not selling your games? How much money are you not making by not selling those games a la carte and making 30% on them? That is the complete equation, and there is no way Phil Spencer is right. Sorry. There's just no way. I would love someone to sit down and ask him that. Phil, let me break it down and ask him a really good question. How much do you consider Game Pass a profitable entity when taking into account all economic factors that run in, out, and around the service? The answer has got to be no. Because as we just saw, Sony minted $350 million selling 5 million copies of God of War. And there isn't a single Xbox One game or Xbox Series X game that's going to sell that many copies. Because it's on Game Pass. The other thing that I can test is this idea of Microsoft having a more contemporaneous strand of quality. Like it won, and I talked about this with Cog on our episode of Defining Duke Ultimate that will go up. I'm sorry, on Sacred Symbols Cross Defining Duke. Which is, I don't think Microsoft deserves credit for a lot of that. Psychonauts 2, not your game. Deathloop, not your game. This year, Ghostwire Tokyo, not your game. Fallout or Starfield, not your game. And we're going to talk about those later. So I feel like the proof is still going to have to be in the pudding as far as can they deliver? Because their big marquee game, Halo, no, definitely not. Definitely not by any objective measure. And so I think that that's an important part too. Okay. I thought this was interesting. Part 9. There's statistics here. SIA agrees with these findings and the framework for the assessment, blah, 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 blah. It says Microsoft's and Activision's internal documents, views from multiple third parties, revenue and user engagement data for Microsoft, showing Activision and Microsoft's titles account for 30 to 40% of minutes played on consoles in the UK.
Whoa.
Wowzers. That alone. So let's be aggressive and say it's 40% between Microsoft and Activision together. That is certainly more than Sony, which is not noted in this document. Because you have to consider Nintendo, you have to consider PC, mobile, and all those other things, right? Or it's actually console. So you really have to consider PlayStation and Switch, I guess. So it could be 40, 40, 20, I suppose. But that's significant. I'm surprised that wasn't underlined and bolded. What do you think of that? 30 to 40% of minutes played on consoles in the UK are on Activision or Microsoft games.
Right. Well, and I'm wondering how that further splits between Activision and Microsoft specifically. Like, is the Activision like 35% or like 25%, whereas the Microsoft is much lower? But yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm reading on here. Sorry, just making sure I'm not missing anything. I think we're okay here. I'm not trying to bog this down. People should go read all these things themselves. I'm not trying to like get everything out here. Let's see. Oh, all right. Let's get into some redactions. Number 12. In response, Microsoft argues by reference to redacted Xbox usage data that Call of Duty gamers, quote, cannot be considered special or unique, end quote. This is incorrect and disproven by the available data. What matters is the importance of the content that Microsoft would control post-transaction compared to its competitors, and how this would affect competitive dynamics over time. The reality is that the transaction would give Microsoft control of irreplaceable content that could in turn confer an extraordinary advantage and allow it to foreclose rivals. So this is an important part, because what it's basically saying is that Microsoft says Call of Duty gamers cannot be considered special or unique. Sony says wrong. And they actually have data contending that, but some of it, unfortunately, is redacted. And it says Microsoft would control irreplaceable content that drives user engagement. Post-transaction, Microsoft would control Activision content that drives redacted times as much user engagement on PlayStation than all of SIE's best performing first-party titles put together. Wow. Redacted of that user engagement is driven by Call of Duty alone. So we don't know the numbers, but let me reiterate so everyone follows. Post-transaction, Microsoft would control Activision content that drives redacted times as much user engagement on PlayStation than all of SIE's best performing first party titles put together. What do you think of that?
That's, yeah, well, it's funny because it already sounds like a large number, that it's many times, not like a percent or anything.
Yeah, if you could actually, if people could see the thing, I was trying to figure out, it looks like it's double digits, the amount of redaction, if there's a percentage sign. So I think it's double digits. That's all I can garner from it.
It's double digits. Well, let's just say it's potentially double digits, and then it's also all of the games put together. I mean, that's just that is extremely interesting data, and it's somewhat not surprising, at least to me, as a Call of Duty player and being a little bit in that culture, is that some people that play Call of Duty, it's like that's their game. That's the game they play. And maybe they'll play one or two games throughout the year. Maybe they'll play another big title like Madden. Maybe they'll play God of War or something like that, like the really big ones. But a lot of Call of Duty players, that's like it's a lifestyle type of game that they stick with.
I think it's incredible. The term here that I think is important to key in on is user engagement. So they're not contesting that people don't buy and play the PlayStation games by the millions. What they're saying is that when you're done with God of War after 40 hours, you're done. And that user engagement ends. And Call of Duty's user engagement persistent is better than all of those games combined. That's fucking crazy. And that's buried at number 12, part A. It's like, why? That seems to be a fairly salient thing. I wish we knew what that number was. It also goes on to say, Call of Duty gamers are exceptionally important to PlayStation. In 2021, redacted million PlayStation users played Call of Duty. accounting for around redacted percent of the PlayStation user base and spending redacted billions on Call of Duty titles and associated game add-ons. More importantly, these users generated estimated annual platform spending of around redacted billion on hardware, peripherals, subscription games, and other PlayStation services. This represents around redacted percent of total spending on hardware, peripherals, subscription games, and other PlayStation services. So again, all the material numbers are redacted, but in 2021, X million PlayStation users played Call of Duty, accounting for around Y percent of the PlayStation user base and spending Z billion on Call of Duty titles. Man, what are the numbers?
Yeah.
What are the numbers? What do you think? Fill it in.
Well, just think about all the Battle Pass subscriptions, all of the skins bought in game. There's and it's regularly refreshed, right? So the microtransactions are huge. And what's funny too is that these numbers are seemingly, we don't know them exactly, very high, and they're not even selling DLC maps anymore, right? This is just insane. The level of money that the platform of Call of Duty just continues to sell is crazy. I'm wondering how that compares to Fortnite. Actually, I imagine they're kind of in the same ballpark. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm trying to again look at the redaction sizes. I would say that first redaction in 2021 redacted million. I think that's teen number, like 13, something like that, based on its skinniness. Could even be 11. But I think it's like something more like 15, something like that. So let's just say 15 million PlayStation users played Call of Duty, accounting for around, again, this looks like teen number because of the kind of small nature, but it's more than one number of the PlayStation user base and spending, and again, on I don't know, $1 billion on Call of Duty titles. It's a lot of money. So
yeah, there's
interesting stuff there. And then it says Call of Duty is different and more important to gaming platforms than the other games Microsoft mentions. And so Microsoft, as people might recall, defended themselves by listing off a number of games. And says Call of Duty is different to the other games that Microsoft mentioned, such as Rocket League, NBA 2K, Minecraft, and GTA. Call of Duty has the largest number of MAU among all, and that's monthly active users, among the top 10 gaming franchises in 2020 and 2021. It has a relentless release schedule with multiple studios with thousands of game developers working on different versions of Call of Duty at any one time to maintain yearly releases. And it is unique among AAA games because of its popularity, loyalty, and the enormous resources Activision commits to developing the franchise. Each release takes around 3 to 5 years to develop with budgets of over $300 million. So now we have a good idea of how much Call of Duty costs, which we didn't. And I'm surprised that wasn't redacted. That doesn't indicate marketing, and that's fucking insane. That's so much money for a video game, and that's Call of Duty, which I know is huge and complicated. But imagine imagine getting The Last of Us Part 3. How much is that going to cost us? So let me go on. SIE's, Microsoft's, and Activision's documents attest to the importance of Call of Duty. SIE's internal documents make clear that Call of Duty generates a stronger connection with gamers than any other FPS game. It has the highest awareness of any third-party video game franchise. The franchise redacted. Oh, and it's like a couple sentences. What does it say?
Yeah.
The franchise redacted. An SIE survey conducted in the normal course of business finds that Call of Duty has the highest gamer familiarity, awareness, and ownership of all third-party video game franchises globally. All those percentages are also redacted. Likewise, as the CMA has found, Microsoft and Activision's documents discussed in the decision attest to the importance of Call of Duty. So what do you think of this? SIE's internal documents make clear that Call of Duty generates a stronger connection with gamers than any other FPS game. It has the highest awareness of any third-party video game franchise. And then it says the franchise redacted.
I feel like if I had to make up what the redacted say, it would basically say the franchise makes our own doings look like pennies.
I would imagine that's what it says.
That's what it sounds like. It's redacted because it's clear that even Sony, who I don't even think this is something that is like super opinion based, they are on top when it comes to the premier AAA content. And obviously Xbox has a lot of stuff in the works. I'm not trying to make this like a console wars thing, but right now Sony is on top when it comes to the big marquee blockbuster titles. And basically what they're admitting is that, yeah, Call of Duty is way more important than all of those combined. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's probably what it says. Is something like, because, all right, again, back of the envelope math, $350 million of revenue, 5 million copies of God of War sold. They're not going to have many of those every year. So let's say Horizon sells 10 million ultimately. MLB The Show sells several million. You have this game and select others. I mean, you're going to get into the maybe 1.x billion dollars in revenue for your first party games. And then your second party games will draw it in. And I think that's probably what this says is we made this much money in 2021 on our first party games. They made this much money. And so I think you're right. Okay, let's continue. I hope everyone's having fun. I think this is fun. Call of Duty is not replicable. Call of Duty is too entrenched for any rival, no matter how well equipped, to catch up. It has been the top-selling game for almost every year in the last decade, and in the first-person shooter genre, it is overwhelmingly the top-selling game. Other publishers do not have the resources or expertise to match its success. To give a concrete example, Electronic Arts, one of the largest third-party developers after Activision, has tried for many years to produce a rival to Call of Duty with its Battlefield series. Despite the similarities between Call of Duty and Battlefield, and despite EA's track record of developing other successful AAA franchises such as FIFA, Mass Effect, Need for Speed, and Star Wars Battlefront, the Battlefield franchise cannot keep up. As of August 2021, more than 400 million copies of Call of Duty had been sold, while Battlefield had sold just 88.7 million copies. This is interesting, but I think not really a fair comparison because it's not year to year. What I would be more interested to know is like what the year to year average between the games when they came out the same year were. So going back to 2016 and looking at Battlefield 1 versus the Call of Duty that year, going to looking at Battlefield 5, Battlefield Bad Company, whatever. But this is still a very compelling case. Say like from the outside, you would think EA and Activision were basically the same, but they're not. And EA is investing an enormous amount of money. What is it, like half a dozen studios now into Battlefield? They've moved all of their C-suite talent over there, including guys that were at Respawn. So I just feel like it goes without saying that if it's basically 4-1, that it's not possible. And maybe this really does illustrate why we are so confused. Like, where's Killzone? Where's Resistance? Why don't you try? And it kind of sad because it just feels like they've been, the data has indicated that they should just not bother. I really feel like that's becoming more and more clear. That they killed Killzone, they killed Resistance, and maybe other products that were going to come. And I hope that we get back to some shooters soon. But I think that they did it in large part because they were like, look at this. I mean, what's even the point when we're going to have a few million people play Killzone and spend all this money on it and maybe make a small profit, or we can just do this for free. So what do you think about this idea of Call of Duty is not replicable with their backup being Battlefield?
I think that the Battlefield example is interesting because it's clear that these are two very similar products that are competing in the same space. There's always conversations, or at least used to be conversations, about Call of Duty versus Battlefield. But at its core, these are two actually very different games where when we're talking about core Call of Duty multiplayer, we're talking like 6v6 small maps, very twitchy, dopamine focused kill streaks, stuff like that, where Battlefield is all about like the giant maps, getting with a 3 other people on a squad, and much more tactical, slower paced play. And I wonder if just by the nature of like, I don't know about the nature of the human mind, but like Call of Duty is going to be more appealing to more people. It's more accessible. It's more focused on the moment to moment action. And sure, there are going to be people that prefer the slower, more tactical, which it's even weird because there's games that are way more tactical than Battlefield, but a slower paced game is just not going to appeal to as many people, I think. So I just don't know if Battlefield will ever be as popular as Call of Duty by nature of what it is. So, but to the point about it, like, even why even bother? That is kind of like the aspect of when something gets so big, the amount of investment it would take to compete. Like, I wonder if you were to compare the head count of all Sony first party studios versus the head count that works on Call of Duty.
Yeah, I do wonder that too. Like, we don't have all of the data. My assumption is that Battlefield is profitable.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't know. This is why some of these redactions, they get even more frustrating. Here on the last page, even the citations are redacted.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that.
Okay. Let's move on to another thing. 14. Microsoft claims that Nintendo's differentiated model demonstrates that PlayStation does not need Call of Duty to compete effectively. But this reveals Microsoft's true strategy. Microsoft wants PlayStation to become like Nintendo, so that it would be less close, and less effective competitor to Xbox. Post-transaction, Xbox would become the one-stop shop for all the best-selling shooter franchises on console. Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, Doom, Overwatch, as the decision explains, and it would then be free from serious competitive pressure. So what do you think of this idea that so as people might recall, Microsoft's argument in favor of the deal was saying that Nintendo does totally fine without Call of Duty. And we're not even saying you have to be without it. So what is the problem? And Sony's retort here is saying that's apples to oranges, and you know it. That Call of Duty isn't on Switch. Although Phil Spencer recently said that he wanted to bring it to Switch, and I think that's going to happen, probably in some sort of cloud form or something. But so there's that. But it's also true that they are not the same, and we all inherently know that. Some people say that the claim here is to make sure that the what we consider more layman regulators that are reading the stuff that are not maybe immersed gamers and don't really understand what they're saying per se, understand that Nintendo is not the same as PlayStation and Microsoft. And what Sony is saying is that Microsoft's trying to make it such that they don't compete with Sony anymore either. And so that they're all now on their own islands. Do you think that is part, like, in other words, it's divide and conquer? Do you think that is how you read it as well?
The Nintendo thing is difficult because I feel like it's more of like a Venn diagram of where gamers fit in between Nintendo and we'll put Sony and Microsoft together, because they are definitely in competition for a huge amount of gamers, where maybe they do primarily play on PlayStation or Xbox, we'll say that, but they also have a Switch. And so there's also considerations about the amount of money they have to spend. And there's also considerations about the time that they're going to exist in. So that definitely comes into play. And so it's like, yeah, Nintendo is on its own, making its own first party games that are totally different than everybody else, but they're still fighting for the same attention from millions and millions of people that play games.
I feel like there's an important point here too to be said. They say, quote, post-transaction, Xbox would become the one-stop shop for all the best-selling shooter franchises on console. Call of Duty, Halo, Gears of War, Doom, Overwatch. What do you think of that? Of being like a FPS powerhouse specifically? It is true that they would control all 5 of those, although Overwatch is not really saleable, I don't think, per se.
Right.
But still much money to be made there. I think that this is another, if we're looking at it from Sony's perspective, I think this is another strong point to say, look, FPS, so they have to instruct them like this, right? We've instructed you that the FPS genre is dominant on console. We've instructed you that Call of Duty is the dominant FPS. If you take those to be true, then Halo, Gears, which is third person, Doom, and Overwatch would all be under the same house. And we have nothing. Now that's their choice. See, if I were the CMA, I would have been like, well, if I were Microsoft, I'd be like, well, you did. You did have 2 shooters and a third person shooter in SOCOM, and you shut those all down. So I think that would be a powerful retort from Microsoft as well. And we don't know what's going to happen with the next Doom game, because Microsoft hasn't been challenged yet to release a game that already exists somewhere, like a franchise.
Right.
And this is an argument that Sony will make later, and we'll read into it, that they're going to do that to Doom. But we actually don't know that yet, and I'm not totally convinced that that's true. That would be pretty crazy. It's different to do that with Starfield. It's new. But with Doom 3, or whatever you want to call it, new Doom 3 or whatever, I'm a little less skeptical of that. Or a little more skeptical of that, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember the quote, because I know I brought it up where Todd Howard was asked about Elder Scrolls appearing on other consoles, and he was like, "Well, it would be kind of hard to imagine it not being available other places, but I can't." I'm trying to remember exactly what.
Yeah, that sounds right. I know what you're
was.
talking about. Yeah,
but what's when it comes to them being the FPS powerhouse, I think that the easy devil's advocate is saying that, well, Sony is the RPG, the JRPG powerhouse in a lot of ways, which I think is definitely true, but not as true as this would be with FPS games, because we've seen particularly Microsoft go after and get a lot of JRPGs, most recently Persona 5 being probably the biggest one. But the JRPGs that Sony has locked down, even if you put them all together, again, it's not going to be comparable to Call of Duty, and then just adding on top of it Halo, Gears of War, Doom, Overwatch.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that's a compelling argument for Sony to lead with. And then this is just a summation in 15 in short. Activision games, in particular Call of Duty, are critical to PlayStation. I think that's an interesting use of the word critical. The franchise is firmly entrenched in gamers' psyche. Every installment since Call of Duty was first released back in 2003 has consistently topped the charts. Call of Duty has become synonymous with the FPS category and is the benchmark against which all other FPS games are measured. Through its 20-year existence, no game has managed to rival Call of Duty's brand loyalty and network. Nothing uncovered by the CMA during its thorough Phase 1 review suggests that this is likely to change in the future. So nothing more to really say there. That's just kind of a summation. And then there's a new section here, B. Microsoft has not committed to continue making Call of Duty available on PlayStation and PlayStation Plus. A lot of it is redacted here, down here. There's something about parody, and it says Microsoft, redacted, basically an entire paragraph. I wonder what that says. And
do you think that has something to do with the Xbox, the possibility that the Series X could play it better than the PS5?
I think
so they're like,
I think this has something to do with PlayStation Plus and Game Pass, because what the sentence after it says a commitment.
Oh, that kind of parody.
Yeah,
right,
a commitment to equal treatment on PlayStation and Xbox is essential to maintain effective competition and ensure a level playing field. So it says Microsoft, and then there's probably 3 sentences.
Yeah.
And what I assume it says is something like Microsoft what I think it says is probably some specific term that Microsoft offered them for PlayStation Plus or Game Pass parity or something for Call of Duty that they're not at liberty to share. That's my assumption. But there's that. And then they say Microsoft has not agreed to make Call of Duty and other Activision titles available on SIE's PlayStation Plus, much less on terms that would be fair and competitive. On the contrary, they have made clear publicly that they intend to make Call of Duty available only on Game Pass and have said that if SIE is concerned, it should permit Game Pass on PlayStation consoles. So there's, again, an underlying thing. I feel so good. People have busted my balls about so many things that I've said over the years, and I was totally right about this the entire time. And I'm just proud of that because it was not logical, and a lot of people, I thought it was logical, but it was not well said, or it wasn't widely said. And a lot of people busted balls about that for years, and it's just so funny to be seeing it openly said now, and that would be an offer. Because SIE's multi-game subscription service is critical to its future competitiveness, access to Call of Duty on PlayStation is essential. Likewise, other multi-game subscription services require Call of Duty to compete effectively. So this is them basically saying, Dustin, to me, I think this is interesting. They're basically saying we're doubling down on PlayStation Plus. It's actually going to be an important part of our future. And we want Call of Duty specifically on it. Now, we have been talking in the past about, in this podcast, obviously, in this very podcast, about Call of Duty on Game Pass, Call of Duty on PlayStation Plus. So we already know this. But this seems to me to be the most literal thing of them saying, that's what we want. If this is going to happen, the terms are almost less important than us just getting it on our own streaming service, which you would be allowed to do or not do. And let's just have it be on everyone's streaming service and see how it does. I think that would be a fair takeaway from this. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I think that's kind of the whole reason Microsoft wants it. Like if it's available on Game Pass and PlayStation Plus, Phil over and over talks about the purchases being about Game Pass and how getting people to sign up for Game Pass. And so if that's gone, I don't really see that, like it kind of makes what they're after not there anymore. So I would see them not wanting to have any kind of concession on that.
Okay. There's something here about duration, and there's a mention of PlayStation 6 here, although not by name. Microsoft has offered to continue making Activision's games available on PlayStation only until 2027. So this is referring to the deal now in place with Activision with Sony is through 2024. You'll remember that Microsoft offered an additional 3 years at that time, bringing it to 2027. That deal is now, as I said, 10 years, so it's 2034. So this is a little out of date. However, likewise, in public comments just on October 26th, Microsoft said that it plans to offer Call of Duty on PlayStation only as long as that makes sense, in quotes. A period until 2027 or some other possibly shorter time that Microsoft unilaterally determines makes sense to Microsoft is badly inadequate. By the time SIE launches the next generation of its PlayStation console, which is likely to occur around redacted, it would have lost access to Call of Duty and other Activision titles, making it extremely vulnerable to consumer switching and subsequent degradation in its competitiveness. Even assuming that SIE had the ability and resources to develop a similarly successful franchise to Call of Duty, it would take many, many years and billions of dollars to create a challenger to Call of Duty. And the example of EA's Battlefield shows that any such efforts would more than likely be unsuccessful. So there's a few things to get into here. First of all, that year, you can generally assume it's 2028 or beyond, because they say it would have lost access to Call of Duty and other Activision titles if the deal went through 2027. So that redaction is definitely 2028 or later. So there is that. What do you think about this indication of the next console? PlayStation has never officially announced that they would even do another console. I assume that's not a huge surprise, but it kind of is when we expect that at some point they're going to move into this cloud structure or this console-less structure. And this idea that it would take them years and billions of dollars to even try to do this.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you're working on the basis that that Microsoft would make Call of Duty exclusive, that while a lot of people would maybe continue to buy it on PlayStation because they're already invested in that platform, that when it came decision time to buy the next generation, that if they're a Call of Duty gamer, which from what it sounds like, from what they've laid out before, that yes, that would be a major factor in someone's buying decision if Call of Duty wasn't to be available on PlayStation. Now, to go back to what I said at the very beginning, that's based on the thinking that they would make it exclusive, which we've had some contesting thoughts about, that they wouldn't do that. That actually, I know we're not done yet, but I think that kind of the resounding thing that I'm thinking as we read more and more of this is it's like, yes, it doesn't make sense for Microsoft to take Call of Duty off PlayStation, but is it okay for them to have that power? Because we can't know exactly what the landscape is going to be in, 8 to 10 years from now. Is it okay that they have that power over the competition like that?
Yeah, it's it's a consideration I guess they have to weigh.
Yeah.
Now, I promised earlier that we would get back to Sony's claim that Microsoft has purchased studios and taken games away from PlayStation, which PlayStation has not done. And here's where they actually get into the nitty-gritty. Number 17. More generally, Microsoft's past conduct shows that its public utterances should be treated with extreme skepticism. The decision identifies 5 separate transactions: ZeniMax, Obsidian, inXile, Ninja Theory, and Compulsion, where Microsoft acquired game studios and then made their upcoming games exclusive to Xbox. This conduct occurred despite Microsoft's assurances to the public and regulators that it would not make ZeniMax content exclusive. Microsoft's CEO of gaming, Phil Spencer, publicly explained the rationale for Microsoft's bait and switch as follows, quote, "This is about delivering great exclusive games for Xbox customers that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists. That's our goal. That's why we're doing this. That's the root of this partnership that we're building," end quote. Phil Spencer's comments about Microsoft's exclusive strategy for Bethesda content are powerful evidence that Microsoft has the same playbook in mind for Activision. In fact, the decision finds that Microsoft pursued its exclusivity strategy with, quote, "content that is far less valuable," end quote, than Activision's. The decision explains that this means Microsoft would have, quote unquote, an even stronger incentive to make its content exclusive post-transaction. This is a compelling point that Microsoft does not address. I agree. And I think it's funny because they point out ZeniMax. That's everything Bethesda. So you can point to a bunch of stuff there too. And they use that as just one example. Of course, all the other like Obsidian, Ninja Theory, and inXile, they happened around the same time, but they were all individual purchases. But it is true that when they bought Ninja Theory, for instance, Hellblade 2 was obviously going to be on PlayStation as well. Hellblade, as you might recall, was actually a timed PlayStation exclusive back in the day. So there's that. And Obsidian is not releasing the Outer Worlds 2 on PlayStation, even though it released the Outer Worlds 1 on PlayStation, and it did so through another publisher. So there's that. In Exile, their Wasteland games, their future Wasteland games are unlikely to come to PlayStation, although Wasteland 3 did. And Compulsion, which was another studio that was bought. We Happy Few obviously came out, but that's going to be the end of that as well. So I feel like, yeah, there's some good points to be made here. And again, I think there's an interesting contrast. I'm surprised they don't bring it up by name, but it would be an interesting contrast for Sony to say, and contrast this to our own acquisitions, where we bought studios that worked with us anyway, that we actually invested in. And you can see a lineage of us doing this and not buying the studio if we don't feel like they fit. So there's no guarantee that when we work with a studio in a second party capacity that we will buy them in the future. Sometimes we keep those relationships going for a really long time. Sometimes, like with Quantic Dream, they never come to fruition, even though that was clearly what was intended to happen. And sometimes, like with Insomniac, it takes way longer than you thought. What do you think about their argument about Ninja Theory, Compulsion, and Exile, Obsidian, etc.?
Yeah, I was trying to think of an example where Sony has done this, where the teams that they've purchased had games on Xbox, which they then made that series exclusive to PlayStation. Sunset Overdrive doesn't count. At least it doesn't.
Sunset Overdrive is not even on PlayStation.
Right, it's not even on PlayStation. That's the only thing I could really think of that was kind of in that vein.
Well, let's go through the list real quick, and we can just
let's do it.
Bend. No, I mean Bend was an independent studio, and before it was called Bend, it was called Eidetic, and you have to go all the way back. They made Bubsy 3D and all that shit, but that was a long time ago. Bluepoint Games, they've always been with Sony, although they did do the Xbox, I think, Metal Gear Solid Collection.
Right.
Firesprite. So this is probably one of the strangest ones, but they've also just been with PlayStation the entire time. They've been a VR developer. They made the Playroom going back to 2013, so they've always been involved. Guerrilla did make other games as Lost Boys before they became Guerrilla, and then Sony bought them after the development of Killzone 1. So that you could argue, like Shell Shock Nam was their first shooter. People might remember that game, that Guerrilla game, and that was on multiple platforms. So you could, I guess, look at that as an example, I suppose. But Killzone was never on anything other than Sony. Haven was created by Sony. Housemarque, they have worked with Ubisoft here and there. Like everyone knows Housemarque is with Sony. Insomniac, they've been with Sony forever. They even went with Microsoft and then went back to Sony. London Studio was founded by Sony. Media Molecule was bought by Sony, but they've only made PlayStation games. Naughty Dog was purchased 20 years ago after Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter. They did make Genesis games, and they made a 3DO game called Way of the Warrior and stuff. So I guess you can say that, but none of the franchises came. Nix's, again, is I think the one example of getting a port studio with a specific purpose. Pixel Opus was founded by Sony. Polyphony was founded by Sony. Sony, or actually was purchased by Sony, but it was around the time it was founded. San Diego Studio is the remnants of 989. Santa Monica was founded by Sony. Sucker Punch, they made an N64 game. Then they made 3 Sly Cooper games. Then they made Infamous. Then Sony bought them. So that's 4 games. Team Asobi was founded by Sony. Valkyrie has been with Sony for a while. So I don't see any examples of this, to be perfectly honest with you. And even with the studios that are closed, Big was a PSP studio. They only made PSP games. They were purchased by Sony. Evolution started with MotorStorm and all the racing games. They were purchased by Sony. Guerrilla Cambridge was a spinoff of Guerrilla and was founded as Sony Cambridge. Incognito was founded by Sony. Japan Studio was founded by Sony. Manchester was founded by Sony. Studio Liverpool was founded by Sony. Although that was that's actually not true because that was Psygnosis. But that was like one of their early acquisitions before PlayStation even existed. And then Zipper they worked with Sony and then they bought them after SOCOM. So I don't see any examples of this, in my opinion.
Right. Sony keeps their annoying exclusivity stuff to deals with third parties. But even then, see, I'm expanding this even further. It's going to be hard to think from memory. Like Sony locked down Final Fantasy VII Remake, right? Which is like sort of new, sort of old, right? But they haven't done something like when Rise of the Tomb Raider was a game that was multi-plat and then they kept it exclusive for a year on Xbox. I'm trying to think of an example where they've done that.
Well, I think that the thing I think it's important to note with third-party games, third-party exclusives, is that those deals seem to have been changing lately. Like the deal for Final Fantasy VII Remake changed. It was not supposed to be like that. Like it's some somewhere along the line, probably when Final Fantasy 16 was nailed down as being exclusive and all the rest when they were still building on PC, that might have been the deal. I don't know. It could even go further back than that, but the deals are changing. But the point is that, and I do think that this makes Sony look like hypocrites when they make these arguments. But I think that's only a very top level, not seeing the forest for the trees argument. If you're really going to compare Final Fantasy 16 to Call of Duty, you're fucking crazy. Right. You can't even compare, as I said earlier, Final Fantasy 16 to God of War. Nonetheless, compare it to Call of Duty. It's a big game, and it's going to be exclusive for a while. It's not going to be exclusive forever. And I don't know. That sucks if you play on other consoles, and I agree that there is a hypocrisy there, but it's not the same. And I think Sony, if anything, has gotten more aggressive with this since the Bethesda acquisition. Because they were, as we know, trying to sniff around with Bethesda. Starfield was... That's why I think Starfield's going to be good, is because Sony believed in it too. But we'll see what happens with all of that. I do see the hypocrisy there. I just think it's important to see the games for the games themselves. Like they're saying, you can talk about all the first party games you want, but Call of Duty is bigger than all of them in terms of interaction. And that's a significant thing to keep in mind. And I do like these particular examples because I think they're powerful. I think Ninja Theory is the most powerful example, just considering that was a timed exclusive that is now going to be exclusive and sequel to Xbox and PC. So that's a powerful argument, I think, on their part. And I think that, and this is where it's funny to see this quote from Phil Spencer when Bethesda was purchased, because I remember that this is where I got my idea of Game Pass being on PlayStation to begin with. Because he says, this is about delivering great exclusive games that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists. And I was like, well, there you go. I mean, and they're going to try to use that as leverage, and who knows if that will ever happen. I think it will at some point. Okay. Let me move on. Oh, actually, I didn't highlight this, but I'll read this. Number 19. In response to the CMA's analysis of the past conduct, Microsoft points to a single example from almost a decade ago of an acquired game that it did not make exclusive, Minecraft. But Minecraft is a completely different proposition to Call of Duty. It is a single release, virtually infinite game world that uses blocky graphics, has no required goals, and is already in users' hands. As a comparison of the difference in scope to acquire Minecraft, Microsoft paid less than 5% of the price that Microsoft is offering to buy Activision. Microsoft's conduct with Minecraft says nothing about its strategy with future versions of Call of Duty. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just because, I don't know, Minecraft is such a different, like there's Minecraft. Minecraft is in schools. They like use it as a teaching tool. It also, I just don't think has the kind of leverage as far as a console buying decision. And the other thing too is that when they bought it, it was already on PlayStation. So they would have had to go and yank it off those platforms in order to use it for exclusivity. So it really is kind of an apples to orange comparison.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that it's a bit of a fallacy for Sony to mention this, though, because the reality is that Minecraft is not a standalone game. It was ported and updated many times and has been kept at parity on PlayStation. And there is a spinoff of Minecraft that was released on PlayStation. And there is another spinoff coming out that is going to be released on PlayStation. So if Microsoft indicates that it wants to be like Minecraft, then it should double down on that by noting that it is already proving it with the new Minecraft games that have no reason really to be on PlayStation other than the reach of those games, because they are on Game Pass,
right?
Or they will be on Game Pass. And it's true that Minecraft hasn't been ported to PS5, but it has not been ported to Series X either. So I think that there's wiggle room here for Microsoft to make their point, I think, with Minecraft. Although I do think it is different because, again, it is 1/20th the cost. And man, what a good deal. I remember when that happened, I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's so much money and everything. The $4 billion for Star Wars with Disney too. It's like, geez, man, what a ripoff. You could have probably gotten 10, 15, 20 if you held on. All right. Let me go on here. They continue. Sorry. Hold on a sec. Oh, yeah. I wanted to bring this up. This is why I highlighted this. I was wondering why I highlighted this. They reiterate that PlayStation users will be seriously harmed by this foreclosure strategy, but I don't understand. Although it is dated, so 2027, right? They're making the argument from that point of view. So the next console comes out. But they're making this argument that I think is pretty stupid, that PlayStation fans are going to have to spend £450 to buy an Xbox. It's like, I don't know if that's the argument you want to make. I understand it's bringing your direct competition into the spotlight and saying, well, this is what has to happen. This is the difference. But I would focus less on the far-flung future and more on the immediate future. Who the hell knows what people are going to have to do? I just feel like that's a weak argument. And then, let's see. Oh, yeah, there's some more redacted things here. While SIE could today hope to attract Xbox users who play Call of Duty, these consumers are unlikely to switch if Call of Duty becomes exclusive to Xbox. That may represent redacted million consumers, or about redacted percent to redacted percent of Xbox's existing user base. It's pretty interesting. So again, while SIE could today hope to attract Xbox users who play Call of Duty, these consumers are unlikely to switch if Call of Duty becomes exclusive to Xbox. That may represent redacted million consumers, or about redacted percent to redacted percent of Xbox's existing user base. I wonder what that is.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then it says conservative estimates suggest that redacted percent of PlayStation users would switch to Xbox in the short to medium term if Call of Duty is made exclusive to Xbox. These PlayStation switchers would represent an increase of redacted million consumers to the current Xbox user base, or about a redacted percent increase. This is key, that we don't know these numbers. And this might be what is making Sony scared, because big mega corporations, Dustin, as you know, and a lot of people know, they spend a lot of money on data. They do a lot of internal data, a lot of polling, a lot of user rating, and all of the rest. They're obsessed with it. And part of the push about fearing this might come from this data. And it's redacted, which I understand, but it's frustrating. Like, what percentage of PlayStation users do you think are going to switch? That makes you so nervous. It's not a single percent. It looks like it's a double percent with a decimal, if you're going to judge by the redaction size. What do you think about this idea that a lot of people will bail, according to Sony's own findings?
Yeah, I think that totally does make sense, coming from where they've eliminated, there once was a time that you had to choose which console because of where you're going to play with your friends. If your friends have PlayStation, that's where they play Call of Duty, then you have to buy a PlayStation. And so it was smart, at least from a business perspective, of Sony during the PlayStation 4 era to lock down Call of Duty, because that was a very effective strategy for Microsoft in the 360 era. So it's one of those things where it's just like a double down. If Call of Duty is not even available on PlayStation and that's your go-to game, then yes, absolutely, you're going to switch, especially at the time of a console changeover, for sure.
All right, they go on 24. Between them, PlayStation and Xbox have approximately 205.1 million total users. So that's a new number. And that's not redacted. So that's between the two of them. Even without considering those Xbox users who may be unlikely to switch for other reasons, the two Call of Duty-driven effects described above would potentially put as many as redacted million users, or redacted percent of the total across PlayStation and Xbox, out of SIE's reach. And they go on to later say in 26, quote, in addition, without Call of Duty users, the potential audience for PlayStation games would be irreparably reduced, and the potential returns for developers on PlayStation games would be greatly diminished. This in turn would reduce the incentive for these third-party developers to develop new titles for PlayStation, further reducing its quality vis-a-vis Xbox, thereby inducing further switching away from PlayStation by users, and thereby making the platform even less attractive to developers. Do you think that there's anything there? I feel like that's probably true, but I just feel like, again, it shouldn't be relevant to the argument. Because right. I don't feel like you can quantify that.
It feels like Sony over and over is like, if Microsoft makes this exclusive, which again, we've pointed out that we don't believe that that is in their best interest, but it is certainly a possibility. They would hold the keys to do that. This is the doomsday scenario that would occur. So I think that if you're working on that viewpoint, a lot of these items do make sense. But again, that scenario happening doesn't seem likely.
Yeah, I just think that's, I mean, I understand they're trying to bring everyone's business into this and making it a concern for everyone. But I think they need to focus on apples and apples here. All right. Number 27, this is an interesting one. Fourth, Microsoft's foreclosure strategy would cause SIE to lose significant revenues, diminishing its ability to fund further investment. PlayStation users that play Call of Duty generated around redacted percent of total spending, around redacted billion on hardware, peripherals, subscription games, and other PlayStation services. The loss of all or a significant proportion of these users, together with their associated revenue and profits, would severely diminish Sony's ability to an incentive to invest in future hardware innovation and gaming technologies. Cornerstone Research and RBB Economics estimate that switching rates of redacted percent could lead to a redacted percent reduction in SIE's profits. This would in turn also reduce the potential return on producing innovative first-party games, thereby diminishing Sony's ability and incentive to invest in new games. This cycle could be destructive, and what I was talking about earlier is interesting because you can see they've hired these research firms and their citations are redacted. I would love to see those studies about what they think is going to happen here. Do you feel like I guess we're not really fearing it, we're analyzing, but do you feel like the loss of revenue can hurt their ability to invest in other games? Because that's an argument I actually have made, which is that there must be something important about that money, not only to satisfy and satiate your shareholders and the needs and overhead of your company, but to fund the riskier things that you want to do. And without that money, there could be a problem. There could be a real problem indeed. So I'm wondering what you think.
Right. Well, we've talked about how Call of Duty is probably some of the absolute easiest money that PlayStation makes, and a lot of it. The 30% rip off every copy. And in addition, something to consider is that if you do have Call of Duty and you want to play it online, you need PlayStation Plus. Not Warzone, but the normal Call of Duty. If you want to play multiplayer, you need PlayStation Plus. So that's a yearly subscription as well that they probably have generated millions of subscriptions and even more millions of dollars from. And having that cash, that easy cash, can allow you to invest in other stuff. So that does make sense to me, yeah.
In section 33, they say this in part. Game Pass leads PlayStation Plus significantly. Microsoft already has a substantial lead in multi-game subscription services. Game Pass has 29 million subscribers, which I think is a new number, to Xbox Game Pass Console and Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, and is expected to grow substantially in the future. The multi-game subscription tiers of PlayStation Plus considerably lag, with fewer than redacted the number of subscribers. What do you think that number is? Half? A third? Fewer than...
Yeah, you'd have to imagine, yeah.
Fewer than a third of the number of subscribers. They're saying here the multi-game subscription tiers. So they're not saying base PlayStation Plus, which is way bigger than Game Pass. But Game Pass at 29 million, a third of that, I would probably say that that's probably right. That would be something like 10 million. That even seems a little high. I don't know. But it's good. Not good. It's interesting to read that they're really serious about PlayStation Plus. I feel like that's a mistake, by the way, but maybe I'm just crazy. And then they go on to say, SIE's documents attest to the danger of Call of Duty becoming exclusive to Game Pass. SIE's contemporaneous documents corroborate the decision's analysis of the danger of Activision content becoming exclusive to Game Pass. A February 2022 document states that, redacted. Industry sources have also recognized that, quote, with Activision, Microsoft is one gigantic step closer to game subscription dominance. Unknowable what that says. Probably 2 sentences. And then it says this. Independent survey confirms the profound effect of Call of Duty being included on Game Pass. This is crazy. An independent YouGov survey from January 2022 found that including Call of Duty on Game Pass would have a profound impact on gamer preferences for multi-game subscription services. 46% of PlayStation gamers in the US indicated that if Call of Duty were available on Game Pass, they would consider subscribing to Game Pass. Now, even if that number, let's say that number is half that, that's bad. Bad news. A quarter of your people just bailing. What do you think of that number?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it comes down to, I'm trying to think what the base price of Game Pass. I know Game Pass Ultimate is $15 a month. I think regular Game Pass might be $10. But either way, just think about they're like, okay, well, I'm going to buy Call of Duty. It costs $70. And if it's included on Game Pass, and I play one other game on the service, then yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't I do that from a cost perspective? So yeah, that 46% of gamers, 46% of PlayStation gamers in the US, man, a lot of Call of Duty players then also that they were surveyed, just which goes to show just, of course, again, how big Call of Duty is. But yeah, 46, that's definitely not an insignificant amount of people that would be switching sides.
Yeah, and again, online surveys are nothing. I mean, you can't control for them. So that's why I'm saying, like, you want to be conservative and split that in half. I mean, that's still a significant amount of people. And then basically they spend the rest of the report, if you guys want to read it, focusing on cloud gaming, which I just don't care about. And that's apparently a big deal to them too. And there are whole redacted pages of this part, which I would love to know what they say. But basically we'll leave that there. Maybe after the holiday, I'll get Hogan and we can go into the nitty gritty of all of this and maybe wait for Microsoft's retort. But what do you think of this writ large? I mean, we've gone through this report. Again, I encourage everyone to check it out. It's Sony Interactive Entertainment observations on the CMA's issue statement from their representatives at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton in Britain. And it's worth a gander. What do you think?
I think there's some interesting new points in data that gives some credence to Sony's side. I also think they double down on some points that are really dumb. So it's becoming increasingly difficult to know how to feel about this, other than the same point, Colin, that Sacred Symbols has been saying before this deal, whether it's Microsoft, Sony involved or not, is that we don't want consolidation of the industry, because then we have to deal with stuff like this, all these things to consider, and it's seemingly only going to get worse. And so part of me, I don't want this deal to go through just because of how it continues to feed the feeding frenzy. Right?
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I want everyone to know I'm not like, I'm stretching on camera all the time because my back hurts so bad in this chair. So just in case anyone's annoyed by it.
I bought a new chair.
Oh, you got a new one?
Not here yet, though.
Yeah, I like this chair, but it's just, I don't know. I think it's the microphone position that's really bad. I gotta just sit down like this, like bad posture. It feels so much better. Oh my God, it feels so good. Okay. Well, that's basically it for that. And we'll get into more of that, I guess, on Plus in the future. It's too bad Chris isn't here to discuss this stuff with us today. But I would like to see Microsoft's response. I'm sure that they probably already have one, because this is, again, dated last month. So we'll see when that is ever leaked or put up. It was not leaked. I mean, this was published by UK's government. So glad to go through that. And it's a really slow week. So it's funny that we've gotten so much play out of that particular story, but it was definitely fun to go into. And sorry, I'm playing with my microphone here. Okay. As we always do, Dustin, let's end our episode of Sacred Symbols today with 6 questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas from the audience over on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. Thank you so much for your support over there. We couldn't do without you. Early ad-free access to the shows, access to Sacred Symbols Plus twice a week. Come play Sacred Sales Saga with us at sacredsalessaga.com. Come listen to the Sacred League, our various interviews, and all the rest. Name of
Discord.
I'm sorry?
Discord,
of course. Discord.
Which, if you want to be, this question's coming up a lot. We've mentioned on the show. Sorry if you've heard it. If you want to be in the Discord in order to participate in Sacred Sales Saga, you must connect your Discord account to your Patreon. There's no link. We can't just willy-nilly send this link.
And no
all
freeloaders.
Out, you know?
No freeloaders in the Discord. I'm sorry.
No freeloaders. Yeah. So connect your Patreon to your Discord. Join the Discord. It's a good time.
And you have to join, by the way, at the $5 level or higher. Otherwise, you don't get Discord access. Okay. Yes. Let's start with Colton McKinney, who wrote in and said, "Hey, fellas, I just wanted to gauge your excitement for Forspoken. The closer the game gets, the more excited I get for it. But that could be because there's nothing else that piques my interest coming out in the next month." Well, what do you think about Forspoken, which is nearing now?
Yeah, I actually just watched a trailer on this the other day, some like combat and like gameplay stuff. And I got to say, same thing we've been saying, but the combat and the gameplay for this game look really, really stellar. And something I actually just thought of, I mentioned about playing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 recently. And the voice acting for Xenoblade is like this really strong, like British, almost Cockney accent for all the characters. And it's not a problem. You know, we joke around about Europeans and UK British people. I'm not, I don't actually have a problem with a British accent, but the way they do it in this game doesn't feel right. It feels almost forced in a way. And I've seen a lot of other people say this, that they find the decision to use that accent in these games is not good. And so I just switched to Japanese. Guess what? Not a problem anymore.
Nice.
And I'm wondering, if that could somewhat be the case for Forspoken, is that even though this game is very much intended to be played in English, they got English actors to play, American actors, whatever, to be in this game. I wonder if that might be the saving grace for some people, is to just switch it over to Japanese. And maybe that's a Band-Aid, right? Because, and I've wondered the same about anime, because I can't stand watching things dubbed. It makes it feel cheesy. And I've thought to myself, I'm like, well, is anime just cheesy? And if I play it or if I watch it in Japanese, there's like that layer that it becomes, I can't feel that same feeling. And that very well may be true. But I don't know, that in the end, I'm still enjoying it, and it changes it from me not enjoying it to enjoying it. So maybe that'll be the case for Forspoken. Playing it in Japanese. I don't know. But either way, the most recent gameplay stuff they've shown looks very good. I won't say that I'm like very excited, but it's definitely something that I increasingly have my eye on, and I hope it's good. Sincerely, I really do, because having a game like this, kind of like Final Fantasy adjacent, having games like this is always relevant to my interests.
Yeah, I forget this game is sneaking up. January 24th next year, PlayStation 5 console exclusive for at least a while. And I think the game looks fun. I think I'm going to buy it. Luminous, it's their first game and their only game since Final Fantasy 15. I don't know that I want much Final Fantasy 15 in the game, because I didn't really like Final Fantasy 15, but there's no doubt that I'm looking for something fast like this. And if I can get over the character voice acting, because I'm not so much into foreign voice acting. Micah recommended I do the same thing in Tactics Ogre with the voice acting. And I'm like, why do I want Japanese voice acting? I just don't understand why I necessarily want that either. You know, I would rather be able to understand you in a reasonable way, unless there is a plot driven reason. Like I said, Metal Gear Solid 3 should basically all be in Russian. I think that would have been fucking awesome. But if there's not a plot reason for you to do that, then, you know, so be it. So I'm going to try to remain open-minded about this. I feel like previews, although I haven't read them, I've just kind of seen the quick bits of headlines, whatever. They seem positive. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm gonna play it though for sure. Thank you for writing in, Colton. Callum Huggins wrote in and said, "Hi, Sacred Crew. Do you ever impose your own rules in games for difficulty or otherwise to give yourself an alternative challenge, e.g., no extra heart containers in Zelda? Cheers for the great content on my commutes." When I was a kid, I used to do this shit all the time. One of the games I used to love fucking around with was Final Fantasy 1, and making really difficult, like, I have never been able to do it, but people make like all white mage parties or whatever and beat the game like that. And that's really, really, really difficult to do. But I would do things like all thieves or try not to use magic or whatever. And so that was fun. And then I think about Mega Man games, my beloved Mega Man games, since they're non-linear and it's all about getting the boss weapons to make the bosses easier. A common thing that's called arm cannon dueling in Mega Man is just using the regular weapon, which you can beat every Mega Man game with, except I think Mega Man 2, I think you need to use the bubble lead on Wily at the end. But so those are the kinds of games I like to mess around with in that regard. But generally speaking, I don't do that anymore. I sometimes go for harder difficulties that are just settings, but I don't go to the artificial rule thing anymore, because there are so many games are so deep now that I don't know that I need to do that to make things more interesting.
Yeah, I've never been the type of person to do this at all, really. In fact, for the most part, I'm not the type of guy to really replay very many games at all. There are, of course, a few that I've played a bunch of times, particularly Souls games I've played through multiple times. But through that, I don't necessarily feel the need to put my own rules over something. In fact, it goes further than that in that I almost always play games on normal, and I never play them on hard. In almost every situation, there's games that I have played on hard for trophy related reasons, but I would almost in every situation rather just play with the developer intended experience and then just move on to the next thing. Cause I would way rather play a variety of games than play one game again, only harder. Like, I think that's cool. Some people are into that, like really diving into the different mechanics.
People also like beating the shit out of games, like New Game Plus and all that, which I think is fun.
Right. Yeah, that's just not my style. I would rather play something, get the intended experience, and then move on.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the same way. I do. He brought up the Zelda, no extra heart containers in Zelda. That's a fun one. Also, not getting the sword in Zelda, getting the items out of order.
Whoa.
I remember Link to the Past doing the dark world dungeons out of order. Like there are certain things you can do that are fun. But yeah, I'm not that affixed to single games anymore. Not even close. Where I would do stuff like that. Like I love playing Mega Man 3 with no special weapons, but it's because I played Mega Man 3 7,000 times, and it's also because Mega Man 3 can be beaten in like an hour. So you kind of have to make your own fun in that way. Okay. Shane Bain wrote in, said, the League of Sacred Gentlemen, if the next PlayStation console releases without a disc drive like many of us speculate, are us physical games collectors currently setting ourselves up for failure? Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok will very likely be backwards compatible with the presumed PlayStation 6, but without a disc drive, will I be forced to purchase the game again, only digitally this time? Will my entire PS4 and PS5 library become obsolete? My suspicion with this, well, I have a twofold suspicion. My first suspicion is that the disc drive will be optional next generation, but that they'll make one. And the second thing is that I can imagine a smart delivery like system where but to the next degree, where PlayStation 6 comes out, they say, listen, there is no physical medium for this. You're going to buy games digitally. For your old games, simply put them into your console, your PlayStation 5, and we will read them in some way and put it on your PSN account or something. I don't know if it would be that simple because I think you can then just proliferate the game endlessly, but I imagine they would have some sort of solution. The other solution would be to just buy digital games. If you have been smart since the beginning of the PlayStation 4 era, you should have an extensive list of games that will work on PlayStation forever. So that's the beauty of PlayStation 4. That was what was so exciting about it, was the promise that it was the first permanent console. And yeah,
I don't think they made that promise, though.
What'd you say?
That's a promise that I think that we've kind of assumed, but Sony's never said in perpetuity that the game's available on PS4.
No one has ever said that about anything in perpetuity with any service. What I'm saying is I agree with you, but it's not going anywhere. If PlayStation 4's storefront and those games go away, PlayStation's done. That means PlayStation's done. Like that's what I think. I think that the games will always be readable moving forward from that era. And I think the ultimate goal is to have them all, and they're almost there. Vita is going to be a huge challenge if they ever get around to that, and obviously PS3 is a major challenge. But yeah, so talk to me about this. You buy physical. I mean, we talk a lot about it, and I don't mean to put it down because I know a lot of people like it. They like the shelves, they like the resale value, they like the collecting. I appreciate all that. But I do think that, and it's as I said, when people, we were talking about my G.I. Joes or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, but that is what they are. That's them. Yeah, like I can get a picture of them, I guess, but that is what they are. They're fucking action figures. So you buy the video games are different, just like movies and other things, music, where you have a lot of options, and maybe you want to buy the vinyl because you like the sound, you like the collection and all of that. But I generally feel like you're making a mistake by not just investing in digital simply because that is the only guaranteed constant. In other words, it's never going to go back and be like, oh, never mind. We're going to put everything on cartridges again. It's like, no, obviously it's going in a different direction.
I can't say this with certainty, but I would guess that a lot of the choices behind physical, that the people that are from a collection standpoint are the minority. I think that physical is an economic decision for most people that buy physical, just because, particularly, and we've mentioned this before, but the ability to sell your game afterwards. Once you're done with it, you move on. You let a friend borrow it, whatever. You can buy a physical disc in most situations cheaper than the PSN. So I'm guessing that that's the primary reason. I think those reasons you have for the physical collecting aspect make sense. I still like having the box. It doesn't make sense. I can't justify it really, other than it's just like I enjoy having the physical product.
Yeah, I get it.
I
get it.
So, but as far as what the write-in, who was this here? Shane Bain says here. Shane Bain, brothers. As far as the possibility of PlayStation 6 without a disc drive, I am in agreement with Colin that I believe that a disc drive, if it were to come to that, would be optional. First of all, whether or not they would continue to release discs on the side, that's kind of a whole different question. I just wonder if by the time PlayStation 6 comes out, if you have to then assume from a global standpoint that everybody is ready the internet is ready, which I know the argument that people bring up is like, well, Call of Duty is already just a blank disc. Like, yes, that's true. That there are people that will have to get Call of Duty, they put the disc in, and they're going to have to leave their console on for a week while it downloads. And yeah, that's a problem. But there are still lots of games where the majority of it is on there, and the install will be much, much shorter than the download. And maybe we will be in a lot. I guess the hope is that our internet infrastructure around the world is much better by the time that this happens, that's not really part of the conversation. So what do we do if there is no disc? I guess that's the question.
Well, I've already figured out. I've already thought this through even since I last spoke, which is just that the solution could very well be that the PS5's external disk drive will just connect to the PS6. I mean, that's that, right? I mean, that is the solution. I mean, that's as easy as that. Yeah. That's as easy as it gets.
It's like the power base converter for the Genesis.
Right.
There's just a thing that you put on top and it plays.
Yeah, it was the Genesis turned into a fucking Jenga tower with all the things you could put on top of it. I mean, the Sega CD and 32X and putting things underneath it, putting things on top of it. I mean, that thing was modular to the max. It was cool. I loved the Genesis. I mean, it wasn't as cool as the SNES, of course, but it was. And
cool. I would imagine. I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, but let's say PS6, you can use some kind of disk drive to play those games, and that works for another, we'll say that's 7 or 8 years after. And then let's say the console after that, there is no disc option. So we're talking PS7 at this point, right? At that point, to me, in theory, I would guess that the games on PS4 and 5 would be so cheap digitally that if you really wanted to go back and replay them and you wanted to play them on the newest console, that the expense to do that would be low. But it could not be. Also, it could be expensive forever. I mean, Nintendo, while they're not charging you $60 for Super Mario Bros. 3, they continue to find ways to sell it to you over and over. So I don't know. That is a good question. I think you just have to weigh your pros and cons. And I think that, like I said earlier, for a lot of people, physical is the way that they have to go in order to, if they want to play certain games, they want to play them at release. That's just the option they have to do. They have to be able to get the money they invested. They have to be able to get some of it back to put into the next game. So yeah, maybe eventually it will screw you someday and you don't have access to the games you do decide to keep. But at that point, are you really going to be wishing you could play your entire PS5 library? I wish that could be the case, but the I don't know, the PS2 games that I invested in, it's like, well, I just have to get my PS2 out. I don't know. I wish that they played on PS5, but I'm not desperately upset that they don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. As for me, I'll be happy.
Move on at some point.
I'll be happy with digital, as I have been for 10 years. Thank you. Dylan Michael wrote in and said, hey, CDC, this question is mostly for Dustin. Oh. I've finally been converted. After many attempts with Dark Souls and Bloodborne, I tried Demon Souls Remake on PS Plus Extra, and it finally somehow clicked with me. As the show's resident FromSoft fan, where do I go next? I hear most people say Dark Souls is their best. Should I save that for later? Also, not really looking for an open world game, so I'm saving Elden Ring for another time. Thanks all. Have a great day. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a tough one. You're in, though, with Dark Souls or with Demon Souls, so that's great. From my experience, because I played them in totally out of order, weird ways, I found that while Dark Souls has one of the best world experiences in the way that they designed it, it is also the most challenging from a combat perspective. It doesn't have the flow to it, feels weird to me, especially coming from more recent games like Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne. So depending on if you're able to just buy Dark Souls to check it out, Dark Souls Remastered, I would at least check that one out first. And if it's not working for you, then move on. A lot of people aren't going to like this. I think you can skip Dark Souls 2 entirely. I think you can just skip it. Some people really like it. I played through all of it. I didn't like it. I know people say the DLC is good, but if you want to listen to your boy Dustin, skip Dark Souls 2. If Dark Souls 1 isn't working out for you, you can easily just go over to Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne. I think that's the next logical choice. Dark Souls 3 is kind of a nice mixture of Bloodborne combat and the world of Dark Souls, kind of mixing those two things together. Bloodborne is obviously amazing. Unfortunately, there's not a great way to play that game right now at 60 FPS. If you play Dark Souls 3 on PS5, it will be at 60 FPS, which is awesome. And then Sekiro is kind of its own thing entirely. In fact, if you play all of those other games and then play Sekiro, it's probably going to be really difficult. That's how it was for me, because you have to kind of unlearn some of the Souls things you have kind of ingrained into your brain from playing so many of those games. So to sum up, check out Dark Souls. If it's not working for you, that's okay. I get it. Move on. Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne are your next bet.
All right. Very good answer. Brian Golden wrote in, said, perfect timing. In the spirit of giving thanks to Last Stand Media, I did it, boys. I last listened to episode 195 in March. My first episode was around 170 when I discovered that Colin returned to covering games. Then I had the wild idea of starting from the beginning. It is now the end of November, but I did it. I listened to every episode of Sacred Symbols and even most Sacred Symbols Plus episodes. I took some notes of funny coincidences between now and then, and I'll share it in a different write-in. It's been a journey. Now, like some sort of Pavlovian dog, if I hear the Sacred Boys, I feel like I must be gaming. My inquiry is for all of you. Listening to 229 episodes of Sacred Symbols this year has made me care less about PlayStation and develop a deeper love for video games. I've become completely agnostic. I was never a console warrior, but like Colin, I was firmly a PlayStation gamer. That's how I discovered Colin on Beyond all those years ago. How does the #1 PlayStation podcast feel about turning someone agnostic and simply loving video games? Thanks for everything, boys. I can't even add up how many hours upon hours I spent hearing your voices in 2022 for $5 a month. Supporting Last Stand Media is probably the most bang for my buck I've ever spent. Thank you, Bryant, for writing in and for your kind words. Bryant says that Sacred Symbols made him an agnostic gamer. To me, I think that that's totally fine. I wouldn't be surprised if you listen to this podcast. Well, let me back up. This podcast is not a fan podcast. A lot of people think, and we talked about it last week, that this podcast is too negative. I contend that it's just realistic. I'm not a consumer, and I'm not going to treat you like one either. And so the garnering a love of games generally from this podcast, I think, proves that someone has worked through the nonsense, worked through the negativity that might turn them off, that might turn other people off, and seen something that makes them appreciate the medium as a whole. And I think that's a huge success. In fact, I don't do this podcast to make you a PlayStation fan. I do this podcast because I like PlayStation. I like covering it. I like playing it, and I like chronicling it. It's not really intended to support the brand. It's not really intended to buttress the brand. It's not intended to make it look good. I don't think anyone could possibly listen to this podcast and think otherwise, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, I think that's, you ask, how do I feel about that? How does the #1 PlayStation podcast, us, feel about that? I think it's awesome. I'm not agnostic, but I'm glad that you are. Dustin, how do you feel?
Well, this is pretty similar to my own experience, actually. And I think that what is cool, which I'm glad that people can have this experience, much like my own, is that a lot of times for podcasts or gaming, a lot of people, there's like, gaming is the hobby. You check out, you look at games at a store, maybe you check out a couple reviews, you play a game, and then you move on to the next one. Maybe you don't have time for a while. But some people in our audience are the people that want to go a little deeper, where they like the hobby and they want to know more or discuss. They want to learn more. And so the idea of like becoming more agnostic towards games by listening to a show about games makes total sense to me, just because I remember listening to my first gaming podcast, which I'm pretty positive was Beyond many years ago. It's like, yeah, that was a PlayStation show, but it opened up to me the possibility of a level of analysis on games that I had never heard before. And that was really interesting to me. And obviously, yeah, that was from a PlayStation perspective, but it really opened my eyes to the industry as a whole. And obviously, there's many entry points to becoming interested about the industry, but for me, it was podcasting. And so I think that's awesome to hear someone else that just like going from appreciating the end product and then realizing, going in and seeing there's like this whole other world behind it, which isn't going to be for everybody. That's cool. But clearly there's tens of thousands of you out there that are also really interested in these types of same conversations. So I'm glad that a show that once enlightened me, that I can be a part of one that enlightens others.
Well, it's very nice of you to say. I think for me, I've explained this in the past, but I grew up a Nintendo fan, and I consider myself for a long time a Nintendo fanboy. Like, even though I played PlayStation 1, I played PlayStation 2, I was a huge GameCube fan. I was a big N64 fan, love Game Boy, love Game Boy Advance. Obviously, I grew up with NES and SNES. And that was, I think, that was the era of my life when you're a kid and you don't know any better, when you're most evangelical. I think that was when I was really, really into Nintendo. That's why when we really fell flat for me, it was kind of disenchanting for me with the whole brand. I was like, wow, this sucks. I really couldn't believe how bad the Wii was. And it lost me. And so I started looking elsewhere. And I feel like the generations where I played the most amount of games and the most amount of hardware were the generations I found least fulfilling, specifically the PS2, GameCube, Xbox generation. That was, as I've said in the past, the first generation where I had money to spend on games. And I used to just buy a bunch of games and try to play as much as I could. And I felt in some way like it's the least fulfilling generation, because I feel like I didn't get into the nitty gritty as much as I did with PS1, with PS3, certainly PS4. And I just gravitate towards PlayStation generally because I want to understand and know something really well. And I challenge myself to stay up on that and to know a console really well. And I'm glad to sacrifice other things because I am confident that in what people come to this show for, we are unrivaled. And that is important to me. So while some people look at it as fanboyish or partial, I don't really care, to be perfectly honest with you. It's like, it's been irrelevant to me for many years, what people think about the fact that I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to play things when they come to PlayStation, with rare exception. And that's just the way it is. And by the way, I feel like I've made a great choice. I mean, just looking at the landscape and looking at my own tastes and the way things have kind of panned out, awesome choice during the PS3 era to just be like, you know what, I'm going to just affix myself to this console now as like my home. While I didn't really have NES and SNES were my home, but I didn't really have a home during the PS1 and PS2 eras, even though I played a lot of PS1, a lot of PS2. I was kind of more Nintendo fanish and agnostic in some degree. And I feel like I get more fulfillment out of this. I just don't feel like I don't feel like I'm personally losing by doing it at all. If I, for instance, if I was like, I'll play everything on Xbox and PlayStation that I can, what would I have missed really? I mean, that you think I really would have loved? Like, what is the game that I really would have loved that I missed? I don't know. And when those games come around, like when Mass Effect came out and it was only on Xbox 360 and PC, when Sunset Overdrive was out, when all those things, I played them. But generally speaking, in BioShock, one of my favorite games of all time, was an Xbox game, people might remember, before it came to PlayStation 3. So that's kind of my take on it as well. I'm I'm happy that people have it. First of all, a lot of agnostic people listen to this podcast, and I'm glad that people do. I feel like if you are a PlayStation partisan, this probably isn't the podcast for you. I think this is a podcast for PlayStation fans, not partisans. And I think there's a big difference. Finally, Clatertot213 wrote in, said, sup, why the hell do Sony first-party studios insist on holding our hands through in-game puzzles? Is it a crutch for the devs to lean on when making annoying and uncreative puzzles? Please tell Aloy and Atreus to shut the hell up. Thanks, and Dustin, give my best to your wife, Haley. Thank you for writing in, Clatertot213. I have to say, I wanted to bring this up. I thought this was a kind of prescient because I'm playing God of War and I feel like they're not talking that much. Like, I'm not experiencing that like I did in Horizon. In Horizon, I felt like they were really solving puzzles very quickly for you. In this game, I feel like I'm walking around for a few minutes before anyone says anything. Maybe it's like a patch. Maybe a lot of people's experiences were, especially in the review environment, were pre-patch and all that. I don't know what it is, but I just don't feel like I'm having that experience. Do you feel like God of War holds your hand too much?
In certain instances, yes. There were times where I was actively doing a puzzle and it's like, oh, maybe you should freeze that, Kratos. And it's like, I know exactly what I'm fucking doing that right now. You don't need to tell me. I think I just saw, I haven't watched it yet. There's a really great channel called Game Maker's Toolkit. And I think that Game Maker's Toolkit just released a video called Why Does God of War Characters Keep Spoiling Puzzles? I have not watched this video yet, so I'm not actually recommending it yet, but everything else I've seen on Game Maker's Toolkit channel is amazing. Really, really great channel to learn some of the nitty gritty behind game design. So this video is probably good. I'm going to have to watch it. But yeah, you're probably right. It probably does come down to play testing. But is there an accessibility option where you can turn off?
Well, that's what I was wondering.
hints?
Like that would be easy enough. And there might be, but I was wondering, Sony's so obsessed with like granular options in first party games. You would think that there would be an option to say like a minimized chatter, all this kind of stuff, so that it doesn't ruin for people. But I'm surprised by people saying that, because that's not one of my problems with God of War. That was actually a problem with Horizon. I felt like it was a little too hair trigger with Aloy, especially because she's alone. So it doesn't even make any sense. With God of War, with Kratos and Atreus traveling together, I feel like it's just happening less, but I'm also just not very good at puzzles. So maybe I'm just dicking around too much and longer than you would imagine. And then they say something and I'm like, oh, that's the normal amount of time in which they would help me. But I gotta be honest, I'm glad that stuff's in there. And I think probably most people are. That's what I've tried to keep in mind, is they do this over and over again. So they obviously are getting results from it. It's not like this is the first game to do it. And I do think it's smart to watch people play your game, which they do, and see where they're held up. And I'm sure someone's sitting there with a fucking legal pad and being like, they got stuck here, they got stuck here, they got stuck here, they got stuck here. And then they cross-reference all these playtests and they're like, all right, here are the 10 pain points in this chapter. And we need to go and have Atreus' voice actor and Kratos' voice actor get in the booth and say a few things. And that's what happens. So I would be interested to watch that video. Yeah. Were you going to say something?
No, yeah. Dude, Game Maker's Toolkit, great channel if you've never watched it before. Like, really well done videos. He did one about the world design of Elden Ring, which it's good because he talks about how like some positive stuff and some really interesting negative stuff that I had not considered before. So check out that channel.
All right, that's all we have for this episode of Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast. Short because we don't have Chris here this week. But it'll be about 3.5 hours or so, a little less probably. Yeah. Any closing comments before we go?
Closing comments. First of all, hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving yesterday. This came out Friday, Black Friday. Don't forget our sale. And second, shout out to friend of the show, Gene Park, who at the day of recording just got a surgery. He posted a tweet that basically his cancer is, in theory, gone. He should be cancer free.
Excellent.
But he's in a lot of pain right now. And so we're just sending him his best wishes. Let him know you love him, because he's been an awesome friend to our show. I've DM'd with him. He's been really great. So it's what you said on the show with him, Colin, is it's like, man, why does this shit always happen to the best people? And Gene is definitely one of the best.
That's how, only the good die young, as Billy Joel would say. That's a bad reference because I'm not saying that about Gene.
Yeah.
But that song always stuck with me because it always reminded me as a kid. It's like, yeah, like what is it about the good people that get the shitty outcomes and the fucking assholes, getting everything? And yeah, with Gene, I'm glad that he's healthy. I've been texting with him. I know he wants to do the God of War show with us. I offered that to him. He said he didn't really want us to wait because he doesn't want to feel pressured to be ready to go. Although he beat the game in pre-release, but as far as his health is concerned, I think he's going to be in the hospital for about a week and a half. But we might be able to get him on that episode just because I'm not anywhere close to being done. And frankly, I want to play Tactics Ogre much more. So anyway, that's all we have for this episode. And we hope Chris is back next week. We hope all of you, by the time you're listening to this, had a nice Thanksgiving here in the States, enjoying yourselves around the world, even in Europe. And we'll see you next time for more Sacred Symbols and more Knockback, more The Hiding Duke, more all of it. Until then, goodbye.
See ya.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you. let's begin. What is this? 2:30. Okay. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast. No, blow me back up. You can put that at the end. If you want.
We can add to do. No, okay.
You can do whatever you want with it. I don't care.
All right.